Everybody, we'll kick off 2 minutes late. Welcome. We'll start with the confirmation of minutes. You want to move? Councillor Sherlock and no seconder. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. It's carried. Consideration of supplementary items. Indication of pecuniary or conflicts of interest. Are there any? Nope, very good. Transfer of agenda items. Is there any that...
just a query, Chair. With regards to deputation, this 2.2.2 comes first. So will we change it around or will we just go along with the agenda?
I hear deputation.
I was in the 5.2.2.
Yes.
Well, that's up to the committee.
I understand. In the order of there. So the first one will be.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So just been advised that the reason that one's on first is because one of the deputations needs to get to the end. Possibly they've requested they can go first.
So we have that item first.
Yeah, the 5.2.2.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pardon me?
Needs to be transferred, then
no. No, it's already.
Yeah, okay.
That's why they're listed in the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to part 5, Planning Authority, consideration of items of deputations.
So moved.
Thank you, Deputy. And committee is now operating as a planning authority, and we'll move on to item 5.2.2, which is 83 Melville Street pedestrian bridge. We have our representative, Peter. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, I'm sure.
Vasevskis.
There we go. If you can come up and sit at that table just there and pull the microphone up to your up as close as you can. Thank you.
How's that?
All good. Okay. You'll have 5 minutes to speak. We'll call. We'll give you a warning at 30 when you've got 30 seconds left, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you.
Thanks very much. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to present at this meeting. The purpose of the DA we are discussing is to rectify a serious error in the original UTAS design of the forestry building, which was that it did not comply with the requirements of the National Construction Code and the Disability Discrimination Act, and did not provide the required access for those with disabilities, even though at the presentation to Council for the previous DA, the UTAS representatives actually stated that it did. Regarding this DA, it seems that it has been put forward as separate to that already approved for the forestry building, so that any issues associated with the previous design cannot be addressed. I believe there are two key areas where this DA does not comply with the Hobart planning scheme. Issues with the flooding and issues with passive surveillance and personal security. The forestry building site is identified in Hobart Council's own flood mapping as being within the 1 in 100 potential hazard risk area. Drawings of the design by UTAS's hydraulic engineer show the extent of the flooding that will occur within the building in the event of such a 1 in 100 occasion. This also means that in a more severe storm, which in these times of climate change is occurring more frequently, the rest of the lower level is also likely to flood. This includes flooding of the law faculty. The design of the pedestrian bridge and access laneway creates flooding areas which are identified by the UTAS hydraulic engineer as having a hazard rating of H4, classified under the relevant standard as an area unsafe for all pedestrians, and H5 classified as unconditionally dangerous, not suitable for any kind of development or evacuation access. These pedestrian areas involve water flows in excess of 5 metres per second, and yet they still appear in the proposed design. But the DA report for the bridge states that it cannot comment on flooding of the laneway or the building itself, as the proposed bridge is separate from the previously approved design and will not have any impact on it. This is not the case. The design of the bridge, stairs and the access laneway from Brisbane Street have changed from that originally approved. there actually is a change to the flow of floodwater both inside and outside the building, which is actually identified on the new hydraulic drawings. In some areas, this has meant a doubling or tripling of the water velocity from that shown in the original DA. In addition, a new lift has been located within the building in an area where flooding will occur. This lift was also not included in the original DA. I believe Council needs to look seriously at its potential liability for risks to personnel caused by flooding. With regard to the issue of passive surveillance and personal safety, this has already been raised a number of times, initially by the Council's own Urban Design Advisory Panel in February last year, in subsequent Council meetings, and in a previous appeal against the original development. In this latest DA submission, UTAS states that the main pedestrian entrances to the site will be clearly visible from the street, and that the proposal avoids the creation of concealed spaces or entrapment areas. However, the UTAS submission and previous responses have never actually shown us a view from Brisbane Street itself. In the absence of such information, we have prepared our own sightline analyses which were submitted to the Council. These clearly show that views of the entrances to both the lower and upper levels of the building will be blocked by the proposed bridge, and that there will be concealed spaces created under the bridge. Furthermore, as UTAS proposes to deny public access to the building outside of nominated hours, there is a huge risk of people using the bridge and laneway, encountering a locked building and being trapped within the site. I understand that Council, as is proper, has assessed this application based solely on the current information provided to it and within the constraints of the planning scheme. But I believe that Council should not approve this development application until a satisfactory solution is found which overcomes the risks associated with flooding and the threats to personal safety. Both of these risks could potentially lead to claims for damages against the Council and, more importantly, compromise the safety of those using the building.
There's 30 seconds left if you could wrap up. Yep.
Yep.
Oh, that's it. Oh, good timing. Look, I'll open up the questions. I'll just say before I open it up, I know the last couple of meetings, things have gotten a little bit conversational, so if you could just sort of keep the questions directly to the application and direct them through the chair as much as possible, just to avoid the question and answer portion of this devolving a little bit. So I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Pasevskis. Sorry, I'm going to have to face him. I'm just looking at the all urban planning documents that came with this application. It includes a shot that gives sightlines. Can I have your opinion on where the person is actually standing who is looking at this picture?
Sure. Our assessment of that particular drawing indicates that it's taken from a spot which is about 6 to 7 metres within the site, and is actually in an elevated position of probably around about 3 metres. I mean, normally when you do a view like that, you do it at a person's eye line, which is at 1.5 metres. But this view appears to be taken much higher. In other words, it's designed to actually show views that can't actually be seen from a person at a normal height. So the view is not from the street, as is claimed in the actual submission. It's actually from quite a distance within the site, and it's not from a person's eye view.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I might have a couple more actually. That's okay. It's
Councillor
through you
Lohberger.
again, Chair. This flooding information, where did this information come from?
That comes from the UTAS Hydraulic Engineers report, which is part of the DA.
Thank you.
And we've compared that with the original submission from the hydraulic engineer for the original DA application.
And I guess one more question through you,
Yep.
Chair, for Ms. Adey, if that's okay.
We'll do questions for the
Okay,
staff. We'll do
sure,
the
okay, I'll
questions,
leave
then
it.
we'll get.
Right, I'm done.
So nothing further. Were there any other questions? No, it doesn't look like it. Thanks very much, and we'll move on to the next deputation from representing the applicants, Mr. Fraser Reid, Alistair Flynn, Phil Learson, and Rod Tremaine. If you guys could come up to the front. I might
give that to Alistair. Thank you.
Thank you all. So we've got a presentation here. It might be the most useful way, and Alistair will sort of take us through it. I don't have too much more to say at this stage. Maybe we'll go through that and then we'll see how much time we've got left, and then obviously we can deal with questions. So to you, Alistair. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. Alistair Flynn from Woods Bagot. I'm the architect for this development.
Is that going through all right?
Am I close enough?
Pardon me, sorry?
Am I close enough to the mic? Clearly not.
Maybe you'd pull it back a bit, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
No worries. Alistair Flynn from Woods Bagot, the architect for this development. So just comparing the site plan of the approved DA on the left and the proposed change for the bridge on the right, which demonstrates the extent of change in this current DA. It's really just the addition of the bridge externally in the laneway from Brisbane Street. This slide's in here because creating a through-block link is really important to us as the designers for the project and for UTAS. And the bridge really assists with getting that through-block link from Melville Street to Brisbane Street. The bridge is primarily around creating accessibility into the building. I should add that the approved DA was accessible and met all building codes. What UTAS and the designers are trying to do with this change is to go above and beyond business as usual. So this talks about site approaches and accessibility in the vicinity, and we're trying to get accessibility working from both Brisbane Street and Melville Street. This is just some floor plans. So this is the current approved DA for the level 2 plan without the bridge, and this is the level 2 floor plan showing the bridge. Level 2 is the street level on Brisbane Street. This is the level 1 plan for reference, noting it's quite difficult to see there, but there's a 24-hour manned security control room at level 1, which is about 50 metres or so from the bridge. These are some zoomed-in plans of the pedestrian bridge, lower level on the left and upper level on the right. Lower level shows the landscaping and the steps coming down into the current Freedom car park ramp. And on the right, the bridge itself is shown entering into level 2. The blue arrows denote sightlines from within the building, and the red arrows denote sightlines from external buildings and from the street. There's also some circles on there which denote the locations of CCTV cameras which are monitored from within the building. This is a view at the base of the landscape terrace showing the entry to the building at level 1. This is a view from within the building looking back towards Brisbane Street, showing how the bridge links to the building and that landscape space. This is the view that was spoken of earlier from Brisbane Street, taken at about 1.6 metres above pedestrian level, about 2 metres back into the site. This is a section just talking about heights of that bridge and the space beneath the bridge. So as you come down the terrace, the height from the terrace to the underside of the bridge ranges from about 2 metres to 3.2 metres to 5 metres, and there's a range of heights of landscaping within that area. And this is just for reference a landscape concept which was submitted as part of the DA. I think that finishes our presentation.
Thank you. And so it's probably worth going through the flood issue firstly. So it's important to understand that there was a flood report prepared for the original DA. There's a condition on that permit around a flood management plan. And there's also significant new stormwater infrastructure that goes through the alignment of this walkway as part of the original DA. So the flood impacts are reduced in a lot of ways. And then there's a full-on flood management plan if there is an event, a flood event. So we can talk more about that if necessary. As you've heard from Alistair, that montage is actually taken from pedestrian eye height, just inside the Brisbane Street frontage, and it does show that clear line of sight along there to the main entrance. We're really in your hands as to any questions you have. Thank you.
Up to questions. I've got Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Mr. Reid, can you just explain some of the like concealment from the pillars as well, and also this application was made in representations was separate from your original application. Can you just describe why this has come in at a different time?
Alistair or Phil might be able to talk to why it's a separate one, but it wasn't. It was compliant in terms of access as part of the first proposal, and this is just seen as an enhanced option that was considered as the whole project's progressed past that initial planning approval documentation stage. So it's seen as an enhancement to the development, not a requirement.
And as far as that safety aspect with the pillars, because I know
if we
that was
looked at
being
that
brought up.
montage, maybe if Alistair took it to that one there, so you can see there that you can see people head and shoulders above the balustrade height. So there is sort of clear line of sight.
I mean underneath the bridge, sorry.
Oh, underneath,
yeah.
so underneath there's large sort of sandstone blocks, and then it's proposed that be supplementary landscaping under there as well to sort of stop people being under there, but it's not somewhere where someone visiting the space would logically want to go through its urban design. And maybe the other one that goes back the other way, Alistair, I think, yeah. So it's really quite an open space, and you can see in that sort of top right corner there how there's the landscaping and the infill underneath there. I suppose it could be further treated to actually screen it off altogether, but it's felt that that's not necessary to be so aggressive in sort of, preventing those spaces.
What are the, sorry if I may, Chair, what are the widths of those columns?
Sorry, you're talking about the blades, aren't you? Not underneath?
Underneath. I think they're about 500 square.
Right.
Or sorry, 500 diameter.
Right. Thank you.
Any further questions? I've got Councillor Basalt, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta. We'll go with those. Then Councillor Bloomfield.
Thanks. So just to clarify that the original DA was changed, or this addition has become because you're trying to achieve a cross-city block access as one of the key things for accessibility to get through a cut through. Is that considered best practice in urban design and in this type of development to have a cross-block cut through?
Oh, look, from an urban design perspective, yes, it's desirable to have cross-site links where you can, and from the outset this was seen as like a good opportunity here to actually use what was the old driveway down underneath the site, sort of reimagine that and make it a much more welcoming space that's part of the fabric of the city, rather more a site that's seen as excluding people or discouraging public access. It's trying to invite people through, is the idea.
Thanks. And secondly, on the entrapment issue that's been raised, is there the option to provide better CCTV coverage? I know that it says in the application 24-hour monitored CCTV on site.
Yes.
Is there the ability to provide additional cameras to give more views into that to avoid or to potentially mitigate any entrapment?
Yes, there is, and the final locations of those cameras haven't been determined at this stage, but yes, to ensure full visibility of the space, yeah, I think that would be certainly the intention that that's how it's dealt with.
Yep. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just to reiterate, the original proposal was always disability access compliant, otherwise it wouldn't have got through.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, thank you. Part two,
24-hour security staff on site with access to all those cameras, and my guess is modern cameras have multiple lenses, so they'll be switching. You know, you can have one position with 360-degree views. I assume they'll be the best security cameras you could obtain for the site.
And in addition to that monitoring, as Alistair has talked about, 24/7 personnel on site, and only 50 metres from the ramp.
It might be less than 50. Yeah, it's quite close on this current slide.
Okay. And the building's 24-hour access anyway?
Yes.
For staff and students who want to use it?
For people who have the SWAT cards, for the normal sort of opening hours and different things, the public can get through.
Mm-hmm.
And then after hours, it'll be SWAT card access.
Okay, yep. And the stormwater you've raised as well. As I recall from the first DA, there was a lot of expense going into putting in additional size pipes to ensure that flooding was mitigated. Is that correct? Yes. Yep.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudder, and then Councillor Bloomfield, Alderman Bloomfield.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions. The first one was about storms, so that has been already answered, and thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer. The second question I have is in regards to flooding. Now, earlier on, the first speaker mentioned about H4 and H5 and the risk. Would you be able to respond to that point, please?
Not my area of expertise, Alistair.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't speak to the details in the flood management report. They're in the report that's been submitted to council. It's been assessed by council's civil engineers.
Look, I think the key thing is that there is a conscious decision to allow some overland flow in extreme events to go through the site, through that atrium space, and that risk is managed through the flood management plan. That's how that's managed to an acceptable degree by the flood specialists.
We should also add that the overland flow is a 1 in a 100-year event plus climate change modifier on top of that to generate that event. So the stormwater on the site is designed to be adequate.
So maybe to go through that just a little bit more, because it's obviously an area of interest, that the flood management plan basically says in a flood event, the site's evacuated, that there is automatic doors that actually open so the flood can go through that atrium space, and if they fail, there's a manual override on it as well. So, like, it's actually intended that it does go through that area of the site and actually, stops further damage, basically.
Alderman Bloomfield.
This area under the bridge, it's got one exit, one entry, right? And you've got these stairs, of which, according to your imagery, actually has the highest and second highest dangerous ratings in spots. Not enormous, but you can clearly see there's red and yellows through here, right on these stairs. So if someone was caught down in this area, they'd have to go through some of the most dangerous areas in order to be able to get out. Would that be correct?
No, it's not really, because I think what you're referring to is probably some cascading water down the stairs. Probably might be the sort of thing that you could imagine happening. But the flood management plan, as I said, has automatic gates that actually open, well, not gates, but the doors automatically open through that atrium space. So someone will just walk down through the bottom of the site rather than having to turn around.
Two exits, not one.
There's a bottom exit that would open up in a flood event, yes.
But
yeah.
until there's a flood event, there wouldn't be an exit. So if they didn't trigger, something's trapped down there, correct?
If they didn't trigger, if the doors didn't open, do you mean?
Assuming that they'll trigger, because right now
Yep.
they're shut. No one knows that they open, and we have red and yellow areas on stairs, which are already difficult to navigate if it's in the middle of the night. I'm just kind of wondering, it's like no one can pick when a flood is, and I'm just surprised that we're looking at a map that actually has the highest ratings, and we haven't mitigated. I mean, I would expect that there would have been mitigation to say, hey, this has got to be dealt with somehow. The other thing that I was curious about was under the bridge you had that really great picture of it earlier, where you've got university students, you've got a pub around the corner, and you've got nighttime 24-hour access, and yeah, there you go, that particular spot there, this one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they can, if they had a key card or not, come into this area. They've got little bushes there, they've got all the different areas they can be. We already have trouble with Wellington Court and areas where we do have areas out of sight. It's difficult to have sight, certainly difficult to get anyone there close. How close are the security guards to this area?
50 metres.
But are they in an area they have to come out, go down some stairs 50 metres, or is it?
They're on the lower level, and they would have to walk down a corridor around a door into that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's unusual to have that kind of area where you're putting trees and so forth, which make it more difficult to see. I would have thought that.
Alderman Bloomfield, sorry, can we just avoid this getting too conversational, because otherwise this whole thing can devolve a little pretty quickly. Did you have another question?
Fine, thank you.
All good.
I can probably just respond to that flood one,
Yep.
just to close that out. Well, probably both ones. The flood one, firstly, if it's a 1 in 100 event, it's obviously a very unpleasant conditions to be walking around. So, firstly, it's probably pretty unlikely that anyone's there to start with. But if that did happen, then there's a full flood management plan, and the site would be managed. You know, in that sort of event, there is conscious management of those things as well as automatic management. So I'm pretty comfortable that the flood matters are dealt with appropriately. In relation to, you know, your comments about opportunities for people to be under the bridge space, well, the urban design is conscious of that and trying to discourage that through lighting, through landscaping, through the hard landscaping as well. And it's got constant CCTV surveillance of that area. So if there are undesirable occurrences, you know, that there was a pattern of those things, even further urban design interventions could occur. You know, the whole space could be fenced off, and so it's gated out of ours, but that's certainly not the university's preference. That would prefer to sort of have a more open environment in the best interests of the city and for all. So, you know, gating it would be one option, but a disappointing outcome, I would have thought.
Councillor Lohberger?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Through you. Probably got some questions for Mr. Reid. I'm going to have to face this.
Yes, that's fine.
It's very awkward. What are the nominated hours for the site to be open? I mean, you sort of talk about there'll be these hours when it's open and hours when just the guard is on site. Do you know what those hours are?
I don't, but maybe Phil could speak to that. Might be better.
Yeah. So the doors through that walkway area that we're talking about would be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, which is the same delivery hours that the College of Business and Economics currently operates in.
So that's weekdays?
Beg pardon?
8 a.m. to 8 p.m, is that every day?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, just, I noticed you spoke about how this application was to do with just the walkway, but the previous presenter mentioned that a new lift had gone in, and also noticed the flood information has changed somewhat in the JMG report, just the flood flows have changed.
Yep.
Are those two things, are they related to this walkway?
I don't know if Alice can help us where the lift is, but it's internal, isn't it?
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So the lift was added in conjunction with the bridge. So when you have a bridge there, you ideally need a lift at the end of the bridge to assist with full accessibility. The impact of the lift and the lift pit on the flood path was considered very carefully by the civil and structural engineers, and the flood path misses the lift pit, and the lift pit has been considered in the flood management plan.
Thank you. Through you again, Chair. This picture, so this with you, Mr. Reid, this picture that we discussed earlier.
Yes.
Now, I take it this picture is all about showing that there's not a lot of the site that can't be seen from the street, from the public zone. I mean, that's what passive surveillance is all about, it's my understanding, that you can see in from the public area. Why did you choose to take this picture from a spot that's actually inside the site and not from the public area?
Yeah, it's the one up there that Alice has pulled.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
I did confirm with Alistair that it is at eye height. That image is modelled from eye height, which is about 1650, which is, I think, it's the accepted protocol, and it's taken just inside the boundary, so a couple of metres inside the boundary, Alistair, you'd say, where it's just on the more level area before the steps start. You could walk back a couple of metres and take basically the same image, but it's showing more about the direct line of sight to that main entry at the top of the walkway.
Thank you for that information. Now the guard is going to be on site outside of hours. Is there just one, or is there a team of them?
There'll be one guard positioned there for the duration.
The after hours period?
Correct.
Does that guard have any other duties or responsibilities? Apart from just watching the CCTV cameras, is there anything else that guard actually is doing in the building?
Just maintaining the safety of that particular site.
Sure.
So generally what they would do is, consider the risks and then elevate it, call TAS police, whatever, if and when required.
Maybe Phil, I could just add to that as well. There is a circulating guard that patrols around the city throughout the day and the night, and they're available to be called by the guard within the control room to come to a particular area if there's an issue.
Thank you. Probably final question for you guys. Through you, Chair, the automatic doors, the system for opening these doors in a flood, clearly the important door is at the bottom of the walkway there. There was some suggestion that it may not open, in which case there is a manual, way to open the door. That strikes me as a bit of a problem if that door doesn't open and there is a flood down there. How sure are we that these doors will open? I mean, what happens if there's a power failure as part of the flood, for instance?
I can speak to that. Typically, doors fail safe to open, so if the power comes out, the door opens on power outage. We can confirm with the services designer, but typically that's what happens.
Sure. All right, well, thank you for your time. Through you, Chair.
Were there any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one more.
Hold on, don't feel.
Through you, if the door failed to open and you have a fail safe, but they'd have to go down through these stairs, which are rated as red and yellow, which wouldn't be navigatable to get down to the door to open. Would that be correct?
No, because they've been building. Do you mean the person opening the gates?
Well,
the doors?
okay, so you've got a door down here, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so in order to get to that door, where do you open that door? Is it down where the door is?
There's another egress point from within the building at that level.
Because I'm just wondering, no one would be, if it's red and yellow here, you wouldn't be able to go down those stairs.
You couldn't walk down, yeah.
No, you wouldn't be able to, and you certainly wouldn't be able to go back up, so you're trapped here unless those open. But if they're not open, where's your manual override?
There's another door, which is egress only, which is a single door from the building on the view we're looking at the moment, which would allow you to come out.
Up the stairs?
Down the stairs, at the base.
bottom.
At the base.
So there's two doors?
There's two doors, but that door is egress only, so theoretically for building occupants to egress the building in an emergency, it's not a
So
re-entry
students who
point.
wouldn't have a clue about that door would be able to see that door?
Visible door, yeah.
Because I wonder if I could ask...
If you're asking questions of the staff, we'll finish the deputations, then we'll
okay,
move to the
that's
staff.
all right.
Yeah. If there's no other questions, we'll thank you for your time. We'll ask you to take your seats again, and
Thank you.
we'll move on to the item. From the sounds of it, there's probably a few questions of the staff, so I'll open the item for debate, but we'll kick off with questions. Councillor Lohberger.
Just through you, Chair, I've just got a question for the planning staff. Who bears liability in the case that someone does, if there is a tragedy and someone does get trapped down at the bottom of this area, we know it floods, who bears liability for that if we approve this tonight? and someone is killed or injured?
Yeah, well, it depends on the circumstances of the individual case. So it's you know, it's a hypothetical that could have many different aspects, and any liability case would depend on the specifics of the individual case.
But just to clarify, we may bear some liability potentially.
Yes, we're not risk-free potentially, but.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's my question.
We'll go Councillor Dutta, and then I'm assuming Alderman Bloomfield had a question for the staff that she was going to answer just a minute ago, or she was going to ask a minute ago. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Director. Just to follow on that liability issue, has there been any event or incident in the past where Council, having approved the planning application, a case was brought against the Council for liability?
Well, look, not in my time that I'm aware of. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the other question that I have is in regards to the inundation, the flooding, and the risk to users. Now, clause 15.7.4p3 states that the building under the Building Code of Australia must satisfy all of the following. And A, I read, risk of users of the site adjoining or nearby land is acceptable. What is the definition of acceptability? The definition?
Look, I don't know the particulars, or I can say that has been evaluated by hydraulic engineers, and those risks have been, their conclusion is that the risks are acceptable under that definition.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have your hand up for a question, Alderman Bloomfield? Then we'll go to Councillor Harvey.
Look, I was really just wanting to, I think the question was mostly asked before, but I'm just surprised. Is it normal to allow a red or yellow zone on stairs in an application? Is that normal?
I mean, floodways are common, I suppose, areas within any city, and people do move through those floodways when they're not flooding. So that is a common practice. We see it all the time. It's just when they are in flooding events that people need to take, there need to be appropriate measures in place to minimise people going into those sorts of environments. Hence why we've required a flood management plan with this proposal. So this is a walkway. We understand that this also acts as a floodway. There needs to be management measures put in place to when that occurs, as remotely as it is, but we understand that it is likely to occur at some stage, and hence why we've required a flood management plan during those events, to manage those events.
Okay. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, look, I just want to refer back to, I think it was June 18, when we had that atmospheric river drop on Hobart. Much of the city flooded then, didn't it?
Well, it did. It certainly broke the rivulet banks, but and yes, we had over 250 millimetres in a very short period of time on the mountain. And as we know, water dropping on the mountain can be concentrated through the Hobart rivulet.
Yep. And that was the main reason, water on the mountain?
Water on the mountain, yeah.
So how did this area perform at that time? Any recollections? I was too busy hiding at home to go out and check it.
No, look, I don't have any evidence or information in relation to how this area performed.
All right. But I think the question's been answered a couple of times. It was answered when the DA was submitted with regard to flooding and the augmentation program to, increase the diameter of pipes and things through this watercourse area. We've been told that in the event that there was, catastrophic flood in the city, that there's a plan to allow the water to flow through the site, which makes sense. And that if the gates didn't open because of whatever reason, they could be manually opened. So I'm satisfied that the storm water issue is resolved. The initial DA was compliant. It was implied that it wasn't disability access compliant, and that's just not true, because it wouldn't have got through this planning committee if it hadn't have been compliant. Is that accurate?
Well, those matters are matters for the building code, the Australian,
the Australian Building Code. Yep. Okay. And the security on site, I'm satisfied that there's adequate security on site. There's a security team that work with UTAS, or that UTAS employ to look after all their facilities in the city, as I think I've heard. And on site there'll be security cameras monitored 24/7. And to imply that this is a particularly dangerous site because of entrapment, every other single site in the city, that's in similar circumstances, where there's a gate at the end of the laneway or whatever, could be classified in the same way as a, potentially entrapment site. But let's hope we live in a better city than people chasing each other around down dark lanes. So I'm confident that it's not it's not going to add danger to this site. So I have no issues really with this development application, which I think will add value to the original development application. So I'll move the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Anybody else like to speak? Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I did have concerns about any sort of flood mitigation, and I think that has been answered. You're absolutely correct. The May 2018 floods we saw, particularly at the back of the Royal Hobart Hospital along Collins Street, the water coursing across the road, across the bridge, as it did. I know that there were council officers who were doing remarkable things to try and keep that floodplain clear, so that that's how water can be dissipated. So that's a mitigation strategy, and obviously from what we heard from the last development application, as Councillor Harvey has alluded to, there was a greater pipe diameter to help with clearance of stormwater at the bottom of that driveway, or what is a driveway now. The concerns about concealment are very real to me. I think that any sort of public, semi-public space and enhancement of space needs to be very clearly lit and protected, so that everybody feels safe through there. So I will be supporting this tonight. I think that this is I think $1 million worth of application to improve the access into that upper building from Melville Street. Is it Melville Street or Brisbane Street? Brisbane Street, sorry. To make that access for students and staff, anybody who's going through there, more effective. So I think it is of benefit, and the public can access that between those hours of 8 o'clock for 12 hours during every day, so we're told. So I think this is an enhancement of an application that we have already seen.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Basalt.
Can I ask a question to Mr. Noy through you, Chair? Just with regards to conditioning the approval to ensure coverage in its entirety of CCTV for that particular area where there's entrapment and concealment concerns, can we do that as part of this application?
Yeah, look, I think if that's a concern around entrapment, then we could require that. Well, either as advice or as a condition.
Chair, just unsure how to proceed with that. Do I need to move an amendment or anything to proceed with that?
You can move an amendment, or the mover of the motion could accept the amendment depending on how it's suggested.
I think it's superfluous. We've seen that there's at least 3 cameras, and they're not going to be like, you know, VHS, you know, grainy from the 1970s. They will be high-resolution cameras, and it's already there. So
they already cover the area, so it's not actually. It's just putting a safety net in case they don't when they install them.
in case they run out of money and can't install the cameras. Look, I don't mind having it as a condition if it helps Alderman Councillor Pasol to be part of the game.
How would the condition read out?
That sufficient CTV coverage of the laneway and the ramp be provided to the satisfaction of the Director of City Life. Yep.
Happy with that? Very good. Who's next? Councillor Loberger.
It's a lot of work's clearly gone into this application, and I really applaud UTAS for trying to do this. I think it's great to have a disability access through this site. But I have to say I'm not satisfied with the liability issue. It is something that we may bear. So we may bear liability if we approve this and someone is injured. It's not that long ago that we knocked back another development in Campbell Street where they had a lot of plans in place to deal with the flood risk, but that wasn't seen as good enough. And I do feel this is a similar situation. So yes, look, while I commend UTAS on this application, I will be voting no against it, purely based on the liability issue, which I'm not happy about taking on. I don't think council should take on liability for UTAS. So my vote will be no.
Thank you, Councillor Loberger. Deputy?
Question through you to the Director. Is liability, I know you've described whether we may or may not be liable as a council, but is it a planning matter?
Well, certainly the risk associated with flooding is a council matter. Now, whether it extends to liability or not, as I've indicated to you, that is a matter for the courts, and it's not a matter for the planning.
Clarify that I'm particularly talking specifically about the flood risk here.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I want to make a number of observations. Firstly, when I read the report, I was very aware of and concerned about the flooding issue. I have heard the answers given to me, and then the fact that there's going to be a management plan. It happens once in 100 years. I take some consolement from those statements, and hence it appeases my concern. The other question that I have, and it was already asked and answered with regards to the stormwater, because I think that plays a role with flooding as well, and the fact that now the answer has been given that that is going to be taken care of, it answers that concern of mine. The other concern I had with regards to passive civilians. Now, there are, for me, what I need to do as a planning authority member for this meeting is to look at the clauses that's before me, the planning clauses. Now, having read the clauses that I have before me, which is 22.4.4, it very clearly to me answers my questions and satisfies the criteria. And then I looked at also the other one, which is clause 15.7.4, A to D. And my concern was, again, that it very clearly says that it must satisfy all of the following. And there are 4 elements in there. And here, for me, the concern was, as again I am relating to the statements made already by other speakers, that the risk of users of the site adjoining or nearby land is acceptable or not. And the fact that the answer was given to me by the director, that as far as our advice is concerned from the engineer, meets that particular definition of acceptability, I am happy to go along with that and support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dada. Any other? Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to just make a few observations as well, but I suppose many of them have already been raised by Councillor Harvey. It was good to hear that with regards to disability access, that was already part of it. Security as well for the 24 hours, as well as those other measures that have been put in place to mitigate flooding as part of their management plan. I do also just want to note, I think it's at page 539, 6.9.5, the assessment from the stormwater engineer that goes on to talk about P3A, P3B, P3C, and just, I suppose, just to summarise, just talking about various different measures that have already been taken into account with regards to the flooding. So I just read the last line that I think is also important. The structural elements of the works within the flood zone are built of flooding resistant materials, concrete pillars. Any damage to the fins or siding in such a major flood event would be minor significance. And so when we're talking about that specific performance criteria, the proposal complies with it. And I think finally, when we do talk about liability, and while I fully understand the concerns that Councillor Lohberger has raised, unfortunately, as we are acting as a planning authority, to me and my understanding, liability was not part of the performance criteria, nor any of the acceptable solutions. So thank you, and I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Just on the question of the liability, and I might be testing legal knowledge here. Surely, as far as the issue of legal liability is relevant to us in our capacity as a planning authority and making an assessment to a planning application, there would only be a legal liability to us if we were seen to have been negligent in our assessment of an application based on the provisions that are given to us under the planning scheme. Would that be a correct way of?
That's correct. If, for example, if the evidence provided by the experts in support of the application and the experts who've done the assessment on behalf of the council officers, if the elected members ignored that advice and made a decision contrary to that advice, then that might be constituted to be an unreasonable decision, which could give rise to some liability.
But if we've based the decision on something such as flood safety, safety, that was based on expert advice, and something did go wrong, then we would have been making decisions on the basis of expert advice.
That's what I anticipate. In circumstances like this, where there's both the applicant's expert and our own experts have supported the application, I think there's a very low risk of liability.
Thank you. Look, I think it's a relevant concern. I think it was a relevant concern to make. I think we just need to be careful, as the Deputy Lord Mayor said, about not taking our decision-making outside of our statutory role here as a planning authority. I actually, my bigger issue in regards to this application was actually the entrapment issue and the surveillance issue. But much like the stormwater issue and the flood risk issue, I think it's an inherent factor of the site itself. But I think that they're just listening to the deputations. I do think that there's been reasonable and appropriate measures taken to mitigate those, and I support the insertion of that condition by Councillor Basalt. I think, whilst I agree that it probably is superfluous if the applicants have already said that they're going to do that, I think it's always good to commit that sort of stuff to print, just for the extra security of people that may have concerns or what have you. So with that said, I think this is one that I'll be supporting. I think that, as I said, there are some serious concerns with the site, but I think those concerns have been addressed in the application, so I'd be supporting it. Were there any other comments or questions before I put that to a vote? Alderman Bloomfield.
One of the suggestions that we heard through the deputation was to quell most of our issues would be to put a gate at the end. So after hours, you simply can't be there, which will remove 95% of the surveillance issue, because at night time when the pubs are open and everyone's scattering and it's dark, this can't be used. Equally, night time is when a flood issue would be far more dangerous than it would be during the day. So we'd actually cut most of any issue by actually having a closed area and keeping it formally closed. It's certainly something that we looked at with Wellington Walk and so forth when we consider a similar issue with problem areas. So could that be something that we could propose?
I don't know if it's something that we're able to condition, but I think we do need to be
It
careful
was
about.
suggested in the deputation by the people themselves.
I think we just do need to be careful about not designing applications from the chamber floor. But I'll ask the director about the bank conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly not what the university have applied for, and it's not their desire to have that. Could we impose it as a condition? It could be challenged. That it's so I would caution elected members against that, the council against that.
Are there any further comments? I'll put the item to a vote. The item the recommendation for approval moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
Aye.
Show of hands, all those in favour. And against? Oh, I'm not sure if Alderman Zuko's. I think he left. Yeah, he was having audio issues, and I think he left. So, all those against?
Councillor Loberger, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly. It's passed, Chair.
Good. So that's passed. Thank everyone who was listening on that item. We'll move on to the next one, being item 5.2.1. Okay. Yeah, we'll move on to item 73A, Newtown Road. We'll just wait for people to filter in and out. We'll give a few. We'll give everybody a minute. All right, so we'll get our first deputation for this one up, Mr. Paul Jacobs. Okay, we'll wait a little bit longer. There we go. Good timing. Hello, Mr. Jacobs. You'll have. Can you just bring the microphone up as sort of close as you reasonably can, just so the audio can pick you up?
Different chair. Is that better?
Yeah, it's great. You'll have 5 minutes to speak. We'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds left, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for you.
Thank you. Elected members, we tried to engage a number of planning experts and had intended to supplement both this response and our written response with their analysis regarding parking, traffic, etc., but the lodgement of the application over Christmas unfortunately made that impossible. In its absence, we hope you give weight to the lived experience of the residents. While all residents canvassed during the response period that I canvassed welcomed social housing to our neighbourhood, we universally opposed the development in its current form. I managed to personally contact, I think about 35 to 40 households before, unfortunately, had to head overseas for a little while. We don't believe that conditions would be sufficient to cure or remedy the failures in the application itself. The development we consider is too large and will have unnecessary and material and negative impacts on heritage, density, parking, traffic, acoustics, privacy, and light interruption and shadowing. While we acknowledge that community housing projects should be treated sympathetically, The issues associated with the current plan, we believe, justify its refusal, although at the same time we'd like it noted that the vast majority, if not all of the community, would welcome social housing to the site. The residents I've spoken to would be supportive of a development with a reduced scale that seeks to manage the issues I've described, while at the same time allowing for desperately needed social housing. I'll now go through the issues. In terms of heritage, the site's located in a heritage precinct surrounded by low-density brick or weatherboard homes. We don't expect the developer to use materials and build in the same manner as the surrounding residences, but as your own planners observe, it must at least be sympathetic. We do not believe that the proposed development is sympathetic. Density is probably the biggest issue for most people. The addition of so many more residents in an area already facing significant infrastructure pressure from the Tasman private hospital development that is less than 100 metres in distance is particularly problematic. The development contemplates 22 units with 33 bedrooms. Assuming each room will accommodate at a minimum around 1.5 individuals, it will house around 50 people, not including guests and visitors. The plan to house 50 or more residents on the site will result in a socially and aesthetically discordant development that will detract from the existing neighbourhood atmosphere and house its own residents in an inappropriately dense and under-resourced space. One of the many examples of the developer's overreach, we believe, in scale, is that every week 44 additional bins will line Pavia Street and Sunnyside roads. Combined with parking, this is already an issue for existing residents and will increase congestion and risks to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Further, the development does not include a practical shared space for residents, currently equivalent in size to 2 car park spaces and for the most part taken up by 2 small tables. The developer's allowance for residents' recreation is non-functional and the space will either be not used or alternatively overwhelmed at different times. For this reason, it will result in substantial overflows of resident social groups onto ill-suited and unsafe surrounding footpaths and neighbouring spaces, which are not designed to accommodate recreational or social activities. We're particularly concerned that the design will result in unsafe overflow of residents, and particularly residents/guests' children, onto neighbouring roads. In respect of parking, 12 on-site car parking spaces are proposed. It's likely that, given the development will house 50 or more residents, if you assume each resident has on average a single vehicle, an additional 38 car parks will be required. That does not account for guests and visitors either. We do not accept the vehicle number estimates in the application. With Sunnyside Road, Pavia Street, Newtown Road already at or exceeding parking capacity, there is insufficient parking in the design for new residents and visitors. We also note that the development fails to account for the increased parking requirements of the hospital. The ad hoc parking, as necessary, will result in congestion and danger to residents, pedestrians and transiting vehicles alike. The plan also fails to account for future uses of the property. And we note by contrast the Blue Gum site, which has 29 apartments and 32 car spaces.
You've got 30 seconds left, so if you could just
Thank
wrap
you.
up.
We also believe that along with these car numbers, the traffic safety will be impacted significantly. We also believe the acoustics of that number of people will impact neighbouring houses. Privacy will be affected. Light and shadowing, as shown on the applicant's own plan, does not comply with the standards required. And on that note, the very curtailed presentation, I'll rest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Deputy.
Through you, Chair. Could you just describe, you did raise the issue of overshadowing, did you?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are the main impacts or the impacts on the main buildings, do you think?
The main impacts are for those residences on Newtown Road, directly opposite. We were able to canvass one owner, 2 others were rentals, and I wasn't able, given the Christmas period engagement time, to actually contact or engage with them. I'd also point out, although it's not to do with existing neighbourhood residents, but the actual residents of the flats themselves, it looks as though in the middle of winter the bottom occupants will be getting around 2 to 3 hours of sunshine a day. There'll be absolutely nothing until midday, and then it's going to drop very rapidly after that because it is essentially built into the side of a quarry.
And just a supplementary question. So the cyclone fence, like the tennis court fence, is that not going to be retained on that aspect between the Newtown Road houses?
Are you referring to the fence onto Sunnyside and Pavia Street?
Yeah, on Sunnyside, yes.
It is intended that there be a fence.
Yeah.
I suppose the exact sort of, the fence doesn't alter what we see as residents as the significant failures to account for that, I guess, the site development.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? No.
I do, Chair.
Councillor Becker.
Just through you. I'm sorry, I won't look at you when I talk. I have to talk to my microphone. But I'm just interested in the bin issue. It is a pretty small street, and that's a lot of extra bins. Do you guys currently already have issues with bins on that street?
On certain days, there will be issues with bins, depending on where the cars are parked. Certainly during the week and with the hospital being built, we expect significantly more issues than we're currently having. We're already beginning to see the creep of, I guess, Hobart workers up to Newtown, as you've already seen in West Hobart, etc., where residents can't in fact park. We're beginning to see similar things in Newtown as well. And with the hospital's development, the residents I spoke to, believe that will continue to happen and will get significantly worse. Although, again, it would have been nice to present you with some professional facts and figures, but the timing of the application has prevented us from obtaining those.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Dada.
Thank you, Chair. You also mentioned about parking. What is your lived experience? Because what I have read in the report is different to what you're saying.
My feeling is that report does not have a close alignment with reality in respect of parking or traffic safety. They said, for example, they've said there've been no sort of reportable accidents, or very few. There've been a number of accidents in that area. You can speak to any resident. We've heard it. We've seen them. Our cars have been damaged. Yeah, it doesn't represent what we've seen.
Any other questions? No. Thank you. We'll ask you to take your seat. We'll move on to the next deputation, which is Ms. Lisa Jotic. Apologies.
Hello.
Minutes, we'll give you a warning.
I won't take 5 minutes. I'm somewhat unprepared because of the Christmas period. I support everything that Paul has just mentioned. I won't go across all of those points that he's raised. I guess what I'd like to raise is the change of use of the space. It's being changed from recreation to residential, and I think in this time, recreational space is extremely important to retain in inner city locations. We've seen the importance of it during COVID, having those spaces to enhance our community, and I feel that the loss of that recreational space would be of huge detriment to our community. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Elliott.
What's your relationship to the development?
I live across the road. Yep.
Thank you.
Deputy.
Questions?
Deputy, and then Councillor Loberger.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. I take your point about the recreational facilities and we don't want to trade too many of those. Do you know how often the clay courts were used?
The clay courts were used multiple nights during the week. It was a really strong community down there, and it's a generational community as well. I have friends who told me stories of basically growing up on those clay tennis courts. Sorry, my phone's ringing. It's my son. There are, strong community bonds that those tennis courts have facilitated across the Hobart community for
And a supplementary
generations.
question.
what sort of recreational facilities are there around your neighbourhood?
There is a Cornelian Bay hockey facility down the road. There are the Clare Street Oval, and then the Domain tennis courts, but there does exist a barrier of the Brooker Avenue to access the Domain from Newtown.
Thank you.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you. Just through you, Chair, I just wanted to ask you, Mr Jacobs mentioned sort of issues with bins causing obstructions on the footpath and a lot of car parking. I just wanted to get your feeling about those two issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, car parking is that is such a prevalent issue. I know people that park on Sunnyside Road to catch the bus into town. They come in from outlying suburbs, so that's definitely happening. The visibility, I have an internal block, so I have great difficulty with visibility up and down the street because of the car parks that are blocking visual. And yeah, rubbish bins, because of the cars that parked there, the rubbish truck can't get in, and so you've got to call the rubbish truck back to come and pick up your full rubbish bin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Thanks a lot for your time. We'll
Thank
move
you.
on to the next, being the applicant, representatives of the applicants. We've got Monica Cameron from ERA Planning, Emma Riley, Ben Wilson, Bella Quinn, Chris Jacobson and Peter Hubble.
Hi everyone, thanks for your time tonight. I might just start by introducing us. So Emma and myself are planners from ERA Planning and Environment. We've been on the project team for a while now. So Ben Wilson is from Centre Care, our client, and we've got Peter Hubble, our traffic engineer, here with us. So I won't rehash the application because we've already had a bit of a chat about it, and I'll hand it over to Ben to talk more about the operational side of it.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to come this evening to discuss the application. Just by way of background, I'm Chief Executive Officer of Centre Care Evolve Housing, which is a Tier 1 community housing provider in Tasmania, one of 4 Tier 1s in Tasmania. And we are, this particular project is a joint venture between us and now Homes Tasmania, the state government, which own the land. We put a submission forward in relation to constructing on the site that will continue to be owned by Homes Tasmania to develop the site for some 22 units, and that proposal has obviously led us to the application that's come forward today. So we have 22 units, 11 of them 1 bedroom and 11 of them 2 bedroom. And to give you an idea, when we put forward proposals such as this, we look at the demand data and requirements in the particular regions, which is managed by Housing Connect, which manages the social housing wait list, and that's the intention of the development, to house people from the social housing wait list. In the Newtown area, there is a demand currently sitting there for some 271 bedroom units in the Newtown area alone and 142 bedroom units. And when you look at those assessments, they are either assessed as a 1 bedroom unit with an individual or a 2 bedroom unit with a two person or potentially 3 person family. That is how the Housing Connect system works, so that we do not provide overcrowding situations in any type of housing. There is a significant demand for 3 and 4 bedroom homes as well, but when you look at the 270 demand for 1 bedroom and 140 for 2 bedroom is substantial. We believe that this development will go a small way to addressing a significant issue that's currently there within the housing situation in Tasmania. The development itself, as I said, 22 units. There's vehicular access through a new ramp on site, but it is proposed. There's pedestrian access and upgrade, and all pedestrian access from all 3 frontages of the site. There is 12 car parking spaces, and I note the concerns that have been raised around car parking. We have provided substantial evidence on the back of managing some 3,000 properties across southern Tasmania in relation to vehicle ownership within the social housing wait list. This in conjunction also with evidence provided by Homes Tasmania on recent developments, and I'm talking recent developments in the last 3 years that have come before Council, are fully supported, I guess, the approach that we've taken around the appropriateness of the housing and the vehicle requirements for the tenants that will be housed on the site. We believe what has been provided is sufficient to accommodate the complex that we're proposing. We also have bike parking and motorcycle parking. There is also significant work that will be done in the road reserve with upgrade of the footpath and amenities for the neighbours. There was obviously a number of objections that came forward, and whilst we can't necessarily always accommodate all of those objections, there are a number of things that have been conditioned on the permit in relation to fencing and privacy that we are more than comfortable that they be conditioned as part of the permit conditions. The traffic, obviously, assessment, I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'm not going to comment on that. We engaged a traffic engineer in Peter and his firm that has provided evidence and supporting documentation that's also been endorsed and supported by council officers who are experts in the field. So I won't comment too much further on that because I believe that's Peter's role and responsibility to do so. At the end of the day, we are extremely motivated to see a situation where we can help people that are in housing need, and it's fantastic for me to sit here and understand and hear that the representatives and neighbours are not opposed to social housing. I understand the concerns around the density, but we have a responsibility, and when I talk about the number of people that we're looking to house, it is a small drop in the ocean compared to the demand that's required just in that one suburb. A fantastic suburb for us to be developing, where we are close to services, where we are close to transportation, and our tenants will absolutely love the opportunity to be part of that community. Thank you.
I might just add as well, if we've got the time, I know some of the residents had concern with the timing of the advertising of the application. This was not intentional. It just happened that when council completed their initial assessment, that just happened to be in mid-December. We had a conversation with the council planner about this, and the advertising period was extended as per council's regulations to allow for this. Also, in regards to the change of use from losing recreational space, it was a private tennis court. There's also a number of public open spaces within walking distance of the site, and it's typical in this sort of area that a change of use occurs. It's unfortunate, but also, as we've just heard, there is such a need for social housing, and in some ways, uses are just naturally change over the course of time. If you've got any questions though, welcome, please ask, and I will try and answer those to the best of our ability. But thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot. I see Councillor Harvey has already got his hand up, so we'll start with him. And then we'll go Councillor Lohberger and then the Deputy.
G'day. It was suggested that the project's too dense and there could be up to 50 people living on that site. What's your experience with regard to one-bedroom units and two-bedroom units, affordable social housing? Are they generally fully occupied, like one-bedroom units, one person per one-bedroom unit, usually?
That's correct, and I compare it to other complexes, and we've just recently developed a 55-unit two-bedroom development at Claremont, and most of those are actually occupied by single residences. So it's not uncommon for a single resident on the social housing work list to be allocated a two-bedroom property, and it is quite common, extremely common considering when you look at the numbers there of a single resident occupying a single bedroom property as well.
So it's highly unlikely that we'd have 50 people living on that site.
It is unlikely. It is not possible to happen based on what you look at from a contractual obligation and the way that Housing Connect and that wait list works. It won't allow that level of overcrowding.
And through your chair, could you also comment on car ownership in the projects that you currently have?
We did provide evidence of sites that were in close proximity where there are, as an example, 55-unit development, which I referred to before, currently has car ownership of 24 cars in that development.
And do residents generally use public transport?
Residents rely heavily on public transport, and that's hence why we're excited about this particular development that actually does have public transport available. We're developing across Tasmania, and that becomes a major problem for the people we're putting in there, where they don't simply have the infrastructure of public transport to support their needs.
Okay. And final one, through you, Chair. There's been comments about having 44 wheelie bins clattering around. Is that the case, or would you have a rubbish collection service providing skip lift bins?
Well, I guess I was listening to that, and obviously that is a concern. We are open to looking at any options that may reduce that. So it is not uncommon for us to have that on other developments, and I guess I'd probably ask my planning experts as to their advice, but we are certainly open to, obviously that's not ideal in any situation. If there's ways of being able to reduce that, we would.
And to that as well, we did have a discussion with council, and council has agreed to collect those bins and has had a look at the traffic implications, and it wasn't considered to be an issue.
Yep, okay. But if there was a advice or a clause to say that the rubbish collection to the satisfaction of the director, that'd be acceptable?
I'd be more than acceptable, I guess. At the end of the day, we're relying on data and information. If we provided on-site collection somehow, then we'd need to ensure that that's possible. But if it is possible, we'd be open to it, yes.
All right, something to ask the director. Yep, thank you.
Councillor Harvey, we've got Councillor Lohberger next.
Councillor Harvey's just asked all my questions. So,
But the deputy next then.
And just in relation to the pedestrian access to Newtown Road, is that just for residents, and is that an open lane, or how does that work?
You want to comment?
Yeah, it will be open. So the idea is that the public will be able to use that as a throughway if they want to. I mean, given the site, we would think it is unlikely, just because most people probably wouldn't think to walk through other than residents. But it will be open if they would like to pass through.
And there's access, foot access from Pavois Street as well. There's a step down, isn't there?
There is that, right? Yeah, so from Pavia Street, Sunnyside and Newtown all have pedestrian accesses.
And the siting of the units, obviously it's up flush against the, whatever that, Pavia, sorry I can't say that, Pavia, thank you. I should know it. Pavia Street to allow for that setback, is it, from those Newtown Road developments or houses?
Sorry, what do you mean, sorry?
So
the street setback?
The positioning of the units are as close to Pavia Street away from the Newtown Road side of the site?
I guess that's where we have positioned it in relation to the access and the ramp coming down and the car parking that we have provided, and there is common area there at the front as well.
And effectively that provides further setback from those properties which are on Newtown Road. Yeah. The overshadowing was mentioned of units, particularly the lower ground, the ground floor units. Could you just ask? Can I ask that question? How much of an impact is there in relation to overshadowing?
There are the bottom units that do have some overshadowing of their private open spaces. This is something we had a look into when designing the units, and it's quite difficult with the topography of the site and also given the quarry walls. And it's just a natural issue. The neighbours along there would have similar issues with their overshadowing, so it was designed to the best of the ability, and to mitigate that, for each unit they have 2 private open spaces to the east and the west.
Yep, so
that when
2.
One's overshadowed, the other won't be as much, and then there's the communal space. So there's always some open space available to residents at any time of the day. It's just the nature of Hobart in winter, and especially Newtown in winter, that the architects couldn't get around it to as much as we would have liked, but also it's a trade-off for the location of the site as well, that being in this location, it was considered more appropriate to have multiple open spaces for residents to use rather than one that was overshadowed. So we've mitigated it to the best of our ability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, and then Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you. So you mentioned density in your noting that was a common theme in the representations that came forward. Have you considered, or would you be open to reducing the density on the site?
Short answer is no. In relation to our contractual obligations with Homes Tasmania, they're looking to maximise the outcomes on any of the sites they have. As you can appreciate, there is strong commitments and demand to deliver social housing, and there's less and less land available. So that is not our decision, and Homes Tasmania looking for us to provide as high a density outcome as we could in relation to support what's required from a housing space.
And supplementary to that, when you say maximising, do you mean if there's a quantifiable figure like per site size, or is it a subjective please maximise it?
Well, it's looking and working with each planning authority to see what is possible, and we believe through the design that we have done here and through going through the planning process with the council officers that we've landed on a development that's suitable both from a planning perspective and also an outcome perspective for our tenants.
My second question, you mentioned how it would be, I think the quote was, impossible to have 50 people on the site, given you match properties with residents. What strategies do you have in place to prevent things like subletting and, you know, friends that come to stay that never leave?
Yeah, we have very strict tenancy policies that are administered there, so there's absolutely no subletting. You're in breach of your lease agreement under the Act. And in relation to people that come in and move in permanently, you're also in breach of the Act without notification. And if we discover that, we act on that by removing that individual, or if they don't want to remove, there will be a notice to vacate.
And in supplementary, how does that discovery take place?
We have, and this is probably something I didn't point out before, we have obviously a very strong tenancy management team. We also have a very strong community team as well that engage with our tenants regularly. So on a complex like that, you could appreciate we would have tenancy management on that site regularly, and you certainly identify if that situation occurs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just Mr Jacobs in his deputation actually said that there was no practical shared space. Is that correct?
There is shared space at the front of the development. If you look there is common space. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Bassott.
Thank you, Chair. So two questions. One around the access lane from Newtown Road. Is there, it's just my own ignorance, I can't recall, but is there lighting provision through there? So it's a well-lit space?
It is well-lit, yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's a condition on the permit that's proposed as
Yeah,
well,
right.
to ensure that, but more a safety issue.
Thank you for clarifying. The second one is the proposed, or the space that's been reserved for a potential future lift. And I guess having been at the accessibility committee today, the question is, why is that not being built as part of the main build? Why is it being put off? And do you actually foresee building it, or is it just a space that's been reserved?
Look, it's a space that's been reserved at the moment. I guess, we've looked at the design element and the demand element as well in relation to that. Obviously, from an allocation perspective, we'll be conscious of that. And I guess at the end of the day, to be perfectly blunt, it has taken a considerable amount of time to come through, and that's been in conversations with the director that they're happy not to have that complex that does have a lift in it. So we have another complex that was brought to council only a few weeks ago that does have a lift in it. At this point in time, that's conversations and a contractual obligation with the government. That may change, hence why we did put provision for that for the future.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Elliott again.
Yes. You mentioned that Home Tasmania owns the land. Do you have, or how long is the contract in place that you have do you forever own the construction, or do you have a contract period?
No, we unfortunately don't ever have ownership there. So at the end of the day, we have a 30-year commitment with the state government with an option of extending. They may choose not to do that and decide to do something else with the complex, but we have a 30-year commitment. At the end of the day, we're putting capital into this investment as well. Yep.
So it's 30-year commitment for this specific development?
Correct, yep.
Good question myself. Look, I know this seems like a long time ago, but I know from my time as housing advisor to the state government that there are definitely different cohorts when we talk about the waiting list. Is there a particular cohort this is going to be catering to, or is it just going to be to the general?
Look, it's to the general. Obviously, we're sympathetic as to cohort and the mixed communal living, I guess, in the sense of the development of 22 units. So, but, as you look right at the moment, the demand data is covered right across the board, and our contract with government is for housing people that are suitable off of the priority end of the application, which is nearly 50% of the wait list, Simon.
But it's not specifically going to applicants that have sort of complex needs or anything like that. It's
correct, and it's important to note this is not a supported accommodation facility or anything. It is independent. The tenants are independent. The support needs and that are not to a level of what other complexes you would have seen in the city. Yep.
I did have a number of questions, mostly about parking, but they've been well covered, so thank you for that. Were there any other questions? No. Thanks so much for your time. We'll ask you to take your seats.
Thank
and
you.
We'll open up the item for discussion and what I'm sure are a number of questions. Who wants to start off? Councillor Basalt.
Yeah, I'll start off. So through you, Chair, to the Director, who may actually not be able to answer this question, but in terms of rubbish collection, are there arrangements in place that enable our rubbish collection provider to enter a property and wheel the bins out so that they're not on the street?
Yeah, I'd have to take that question on notice. I know we do in certain circumstances, but I don't know whether we would want to necessarily in all circumstances. So yeah, I'd have to take that one on notice.
Just before I keep that going, I know there was a question that was raised to the applicant about the condition around garbage collection. I did hear some grumblings that you indicated you might want to clarify something regarding that.
Yeah, look, we can't condition that collection be occurred by a private provider. Our assessment has been that I think 24. Total of 24 bins at any one time would need to be on the street from this complex, and that they can be accommodated within the road space that lies adjacent to this property. So we're reasonably satisfied that bin collection can be accommodated.
Deputy and then Councillor Dutta.
So again, just another question for you. So is it possible to condition, instead of having individual bins, that there are collections of greater waste and green waste or whatever?
Yeah. Not a condition. You could include that as an advice, but the requirements stipulate that sufficient storage facilities on site for the expected bins. We've done the calculation, and we believe that they satisfy the needs that we've calculated. So, yeah.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. Firstly, with regards to the advertising period, a number of them have mentioned that. Why is it that during Christmas and New Year, is that not possible to change that? It appears it's been a negative impact in some of them.
Look, advertising is specified under the Act when we can and when we can't, and when we need to extend that period. The Act does not provide that any latitude on the part of council to not advertise during that period. We have a specified period in which to determine the application, and we simply cannot delay that determination as a unilateral decision on our part. It would have to require the support of the applicant to extend it and not advertise over that period.
So what you're saying in essence, we have a statutory obligation and therefore we can't use any discretion. Thank you. Thank you. The other question that I have is in regards to parking. In the report, there is a suggestion made that there is a Queensland social housing guideline used, and therefore the spaces required would be 14. And I think then further on, the report goes on and talks about RAT, that the guide there, if you take that into account, the spaces would be 17. Now, what do we use here? Do we use the planning scheme to make our decision, or these two other mentioned in the report as well?
It's a performance criteria under the planning scheme, and we will draw from other suitable standards to be guided by that. We're also, whether that's standards, but also lived experience, and we've had the evidence presented to us about the lived experience with examples in southern Tasmania, Housing Tasmania's own experience with that, this type of housing and car parking demand. We're also draw on the evidence presented by the proponent, by the qualified traffic engineer, about available on-street parking within the vicinity, and and the occupation of that, modest occupation of that on-street car parking that currently exists. So we've taken all of those factors into account in determining that the performance criteria relating to the provision of 12 car parkings on site with motorbike parking and bicycle parking as being adequate to satisfy those performance criteria.
Before we move on, just this might be a bit of an aside, but on the topic of the sort of Christmas time consultation or advertising period, this is something that's popped up before. It's popped up a number of times, and it's not necessarily relevant to this application, but is this something that we could or should make a request to the state government that this sort of, when they do make amendments to this, that they add some scope for us to adjust things during the Christmas period?
Look, we've raised this in previous opportunities with the state government, and they have not acceded to our request, unfortunately. So we can always ask again at the appropriate time, but the government has shown no willingness to agree to any built-in statutory extensions to the consideration time.
Fair enough. Councillor Harvey and then Alderman Bloomfield.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I think the car parking issue has been adequately responded to by the proponents. The evidence suggests that most people that live in this type of housing aren't car owners. They're living pretty close to the city, and it looks like the car parking problem in the area is because of commuters driving into this part of town, leaving their cars all day and catching the bus into town. So maybe we need to consider having some more restrictive signage for local residents to prioritise parking, but to prioritise local resident parking and maybe moving the commuters on. But I'll move the officer's recommendation for approval. I think it's quite a reasonable development in a terrific spot, 250 metres away from the bus stops. We've heard that the possibility or the suggested density of the project, housing 50 people is probably an exaggeration. That evidence suggests that they're mostly single occupant units, so we're probably looking at something around the order of 30 people, around that figure living there, not 50 as was suggested. So I'm comfortable and confident to move the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Alderman Bloomfield and then Councillor Lohberg is next.
I'm just curious, with developments like this where we have multiple high density housing, normally we have visitor zones where they have, your parents can visit and they can park. What facility of those 12 car parks is actually going to be allowed for visitors and support workers or anybody else who needs to come through and visit these people, service these people or whatever?
I just need to check the plans.
I think that'd be relying on the road network.
Yeah, look, there's no provision on site for visitor parking, as I understand it. So they will be required to park on the street.
Councillor Lohberger.
So I understand we can't really, there's nothing really we can do about rubbish collection. That's not something that's outside of our scope. Is that correct? Yeah. Just wondering, is there should we potentially be thinking about, as Councillor Harvey said, maybe limiting outside parking coming into the area, just to free up a bit of space on the street for things like bin collection and the local residents to park? Is that something that we could condition?
No, that's a matter. That'll be a matter for another portfolio, the mobility portfolio, and I mean, based on the surveys that have been presented as part of this application, I think the statistic was that there was 98 car parking spaces within 200 metres or within the immediate vicinity, and the evidence was that only 20% of those spaces were were occupied during that survey period. Now, if that's the case, and we would normally do surveys in this sort ourselves to verify that, then that would not warrant a residential parking permit scheme. We would normally require greater percentage of occupied street parking to bring those schemes into play. We had one recently in North Hobart, as we know, in the street in North Hobart, that had far greater occupation, and the residents weren't in favour of a residential parking because it comes with a cost. Yep.
Okay, well, given that we can't really limit bins or parking, which are two things I possibly thought might help the representors, I think I will be voting to support this. We do desperately need housing, and we desperately need this sort of housing. And I'm just really sorry for the residents who are unhappy about that, but there's not much we can do, unfortunately, so I'll be voting to support.
I've got Councillor Kelly, Councillor Sherlock, and then Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I should declare an conflict tonight because it's this very site my parents met playing tennis in the Catholic Tennis Club back in the 50s, so I probably wouldn't be voting for it if it wasn't for that.
Wouldn't be here either. Yeah.
Correct, yeah. More seriously, look, obviously no one here opposes social housing. We all respect the work that Centre Care and Housing Connect do, which is absolutely outstanding. Look, there's issues overshadowing density in relation to the existing area, there's parking, there's rubbish, loss of recreation space, there's noise amplification from this area being in a bit of a bowl below all the people up and around above it. All single issues are not too great in themselves, but collectively, I just think it's a bit too, thin edge of the wedge for me. I, like the residents, would support something that was probably more in scale and probably didn't have all these other little issues. And there's a whole myriad of other little issues there that I won't mention here now. So, unfortunately, in this current form, I'm finding it difficult and will not support this application in its present form tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Sherlock.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Just considering the issues that, and I think Councillor Kelly actually summarised them very eloquently, and my main concern as well is just about the advertising period. I understand due to statutory requirements there's nothing we can do. It just seems rather inequitable for the residents. Is it possible, and considering the other outstanding issues, and I know we've done it in the past where we've deferred an application and had residents speak to the applicant, is it possible for us to do that, or is the period already?
It expires tomorrow. It would be a matter for the applicant to agree, but
I think it's something we could ask the applicant.
That's a matter for the chair.
I won't give my opinions on a deferral just yet, but I suppose the question would be to the applicants whether they'd agree to that sort of to an extension of time for a deferral. No. That was a no.
There was a no.
That was a no. Did you have any?
No, that's it. Thank you.
No. We've got Councillor.
Sorry, I did want.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Sorry, I did have further comments. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Just with regards to the report that we have, I think it was discussed when the applicant said about and one of the residents as well. With regard to the change of use, I do note that it is sport and recreation at the moment, but the proposed use is a permitted use in the zone. It's described in performance criteria clause 11.4.1 P2. So it says specifically that the provision of housing under the criteria, if it's considered significant social or community benefit, that this would be an acceptable discretion. So I did just want to note that. The visual impact as well from the report talks about how there's no reasonable loss of amenity due to the usual appearance and scale of the building and the topography of the site itself. It did also note, the report said that there's a specific condition as a result of the concerns from the and as a result there'll be further screening along shared boundary line to be included, which will reduce visual intrusion of the ramp and minimise noise and further reduce overlooking from vehicles using the access. And so I thought that might mitigate some of the issues with regards to noise and so forth that were raised. The parking, I think we've had evidentiary explanations with regards to why the amount of parking space is there. The other issues to do with the shared space that was raised, as the applicant has noted, there is shared space in the front. So I'm kind of a little bit conflicted and torn, and I do understand the value of it, and I do understand the value of the concerns that the residents have. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. So, as a loud advocate for increasing housing supply, it especially pains me to say I've got multiple concerns with this development, reluctantly, sadly. Some of my concerns, that mostly stem from the density issue. I think the density is too great for that site. Considering the neighbourhood that's around it, and also the fact that density flows on to other impacts like parking and traffic movement. And another, I do take on board what the applicants said about the number of occupants on the site, but I would actually flag that I have first-hand experience under a program like this where a tenant has actually requested for their mother to come and stay for 6 months, and that has extended on for 12 months. So I don't actually think that that's locked in stone. The number of occupants in the building will forever be that, because there is ways around that thing, and numbers can grow. I actually feel that this isn't a great development for the neighbours nor the residents, to be honest. I think the lack of open space is really low. It's considerably lower of what it would be, I would say, if it was a private development, and I don't think that bodes well for the livability of the site. Parking, I think realistically, 33 bedrooms with only 12 car parks, I think that's underestimating it, even if it is a cohort that tends to have lower car ownership. Definitely visitors come to stay, and we have peak holidays and things like that. I think we need to be realistic about the parking, and knowing that that area, that road, it is competitive for parking, and there's a lot of frustration that would come about having to tell everyone to park on the street. And I would actually worry about the practicalities of people coming down the ramp to find that everything's occupied, then having to navigate their way back out again, especially when there is no vehicle passageway on the ramp, from my understanding of it. I think the ground floor one-bedroom units are especially problematic in terms of just their amenity, in terms of how, the shadowing and things like that. Well, whilst we can't design the application, for me it would have made sense to have the parking underneath, so remove the one-bedroom units and have the parking underneath with the 2 bedrooms on top. I fully appreciate that that would take out 11 homes, but I am completely on board with density and increasing density. I just think this is the wrong site for that, sadly, and I think a reduction in density would make a lot of sense here. So reluctantly, I can feel the passion in the applicant's need for social housing, and fully on board with that. I think a reduction in density, though, is warranted here, because I don't think it makes sense for the neighbourhood, the community, or the residents to go ahead with the application as it is. I would have actually proposed a foreshadow motion for deferral to try and work on the density issue, but that question's been asked.
I also think substantially reducing the density would be a substantially different application, so it wouldn't really be able to be deferred. But Councillor Basalt.
Thank
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I'll note that I have been out to this site multiple times and chatted with some of the residents who are in the room tonight, and I thank them for their time, both when I went to see them on site and for coming out to provide strong community representation here tonight. I do feel for the residents because this is a pretty significant change of use from what it once was, and many residents have been there for a very long time. Unfortunately, moving forward, our city is changing and we don't really have a choice to keep it as it is because it's going to put too much social pressure on our city as a whole. And being mindful as well, and mostly for the people in the public gallery's sake, that we're assessing this planning application against the planning criteria as the planning authority. We're not community advocates in this particular role. That said, the discussion around traffic, people movement, pedestrian movement, and some of the undertakings that I made as the Chair of Mobility, which has been brought up in this conversation already, were to work with residents and council directors and council staff to ameliorate some of the concerns, and options that have been discussed include extending the footpath to join up with the developers' provided footpath, which I note they don't have to do and they're doing in good faith. In addition to that, potentially we can work with the owners of the site as a council to come up with a more favourable rubbish solution if it does indeed become a problem. And indeed, in part of the mobility chair again, there's a bus stop that is very, very close to the end of the laneway on Newtown Road, and discussions have already commenced about expediting that bus stop into an upgrade program to try to encourage the residents of this particular development to use that rather than park. So hopefully some of those non-planning issues that are not part of tonight's discussion but are part of our community advocate role we can take on as a council to try to ameliorate and soften the change for residents. But in my estimations, this is recommended for approval by expert planners. It meets the criteria as set out, and any performance criteria that needs to be met has been adequately met with evidence-based criteria. So while I do feel for the residents, I have no choice but to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Basalt. And just in regards to the mobility aspect and acknowledging what the director said, I do still think it's worth having a conversation around like resident-only parking on the street or something. Like maybe it's not the thing to do, but I think it's probably a conversation worth having outside of this this committee. Look, I'll be supporting the application. Just one of the big things that's come up has been the issue of density, and I think Councillor Sherlock did note it. But if this wasn't a social housing application, it would have different requirements. The performance criteria does state that the multiple dwellings must only have a site area less than 200 metres squared if, and then Part B has the development provides for a specific accommodation need with significant social or community benefit. I think it would be safe to say that we have a significant social need in regards to social housing. I think everybody's in agreement on that. Last I've checked, the latest numbers on the housing waiting list is just shy of 4,400. And as Mr. Wilson said, these homes or these units will be going for people on the general and priority waiting lists. We've had conversations since my time on council whenever a residential application comes up about the need to build more houses for housing affordability, for access to housing, and sometimes those conversations go sideways depending on the speculation of what those apartments or houses will be worth. But we have an application here that is directly contributing to getting people off the street, and it does need to be looked at in that context, and the planning rules even do make that clear as well. This is something that does cater to, as the planning scheme says, a specific accommodation need. The issues about parking, I do know from experience in my short time working in the housing space, it is very unlikely to expect that every tenant or occupant of this project is going to have a car, especially on a site where the majority of where there's easy access to public transport. I do genuinely think that the parking provisions are enough, and I think I do accept the concerns around the garbage collection. I just don't think it's something that we can condition. But given that the applicant has indicated that he was happy to accept the conditions, whether or not we're actually legally able to administer those conditions, I think that is clear that they've indicated a openness to have that conversation and at least try and find a way to deal with that in a way that causes the least amount of impact to the street. So I'd almost even be perhaps suggesting an advice clause just to put that in writing, even if it's not binding on anybody. I think it's a good way to start that conversation once we finish here tonight. But look, when it does come down to it, this is I think it's an important development. I think it's one that I do support, and I do take on board and note the concerns of residents. But given that we have something in front of us that the officers have recommended approval, it ticks all those boxes that are in front of us from a planning perspective, and it also does contribute to something that is probably the largest issue that our city is facing right now, and the southern region of Tasmania is facing right now. I'm comfortable supporting this, but I did see the deputy look like.
I would move that advice clause unless Councillor Harvey would have it accepted in.
Councillor Harvey would.
Yep. Okay. So that's
accepted
in relation to the garbage collection, rubbish collection. Look, I will be supporting this tonight. I do hear the concerns of residents, but I do also think that this site, as a former quarry, has a lot of the, or doesn't have a lot of the concerns that would be faced by other similar developments, three-storey developments. So I think that's certainly a win for the site because it is literally dug down quite some way. So I think that's of benefit. The private open space on both sides of the units, I think, is a real boon as well. You know, like it gives the occupants that ability to go to one side or the other. So, you know, I think that's a really sensitive design, and I feel that the way that the development is nestled into the boundary away from Newtown Road is also beneficial. We do. It was raised during the deputations that we are losing recreational space, and I know Councillor Elliott will be looking at that as part of her portfolio as to how best we utilise our recreational spaces, and this was a private tennis courts, and you know, I think that having this as a change of use, I think is really beneficial. I'd also just make the point that I think as a community, and we've heard from all, I think I've read from most representors and certainly from the deputations tonight, that there is a acknowledged need for public housing and social housing, and I would like for us as a community to be getting to that point where we can have those really robust discussions about where and how and what we do with this. And just a reminder, because there's been a bit of hyperbole, or maybe a bit of maybe a wrong label. This isn't high density. This is, I would say, medium density, Mr. Noy, in relation to a three-storey development in residential area. So just making sure that we have the right language around this. So I'll be supporting this tonight.
Thank you, Deputy. I think Councillor Dudder was next.
Thank you, Chair. I am caught in the difficult situation. Firstly, I want to say that as the chair of the Housing and Homelessness, I would want to support this with my eyes closed and say yes. I think there is a need and it is required, and therefore I would be very strongly wanting to vote for this. However, I'm sitting here this evening not as the chair of Housing and Homelessness, but as a planning authority with that hat. Now, I have gone through this report a number of times, and I've read it through and through because I want to so much support this. Now, I have been through all the issues that came up with, and I've gone through it, and I'm quite satisfied with the clauses to do with setting and scale. I've looked at the issue of overshadowing. Again, I'm quite satisfied that it satisfies the criteria. Similarly, with open space, I have no difficulty with that. I have two difficulties, though, and I am in that situation where I'm wanting to know which way to go. And the question that I want to ask the director before I take this forward, unfortunately, my computer has now gone to sleep and I can't move it anywhere. But anyway, let me ask the question. And the question is based on clause 661P1 on parking. And the statement is that the number of on-site parking spaces must be sufficient, which is an operative term for me, to meet the reasonable needs of the users. And the question is, what is the definition of reasonable use, and who are the users? The users of that complex or the users in the vicinity, in the neighborhood?
Well, it's based on evidence and standards as what's reasonable. It is for the complex. It's not for the for adjacent properties. This is an application on a specific site, and that's what we've got to judge that application proposal against the provisions of the scheme. And it's certainly based on the evidence that's been presented and based on the qualified officer advice that this is reasonable.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you clarified that for me, because I was interpreting this as reasonable needs of the users in the vicinity, in the neighborhood, and therefore I would have had great difficulty supporting it. Now, the fact that you have mentioned that this refers to the tenants who will be there, the 22 of them, that puts in a different light for me. Hence, I am now able to move towards the evidence that has been presented to me to say that in the other housing units that we have in Hobart, there is the evidence to suggest that most of them, or majority of them I should say, don't have cars. That's the understanding that I'm taking. And therefore, based on that and your definition and explanation of reasonable needs of the users, I am now happy to support this. Otherwise, I would have great difficulty. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any other comment or questions from the floor? No, look, in that case, I think everything that's needs to be said has been said. I'll move the recommendation for approval from Councillor Harvey with the advice clause about the garbage collection. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Show of hands, all those in favour?
Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Purcell, Councillor Loberger, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Dutton, Councillor Harvey, the Deputy Lord Mayor, and Alderman Marcus.
And against?
Councillor Elliott and Councillor Kelly.
So that is passed. Thank you for everyone for your for listening in and taking part in that. I'll give everyone a minute to filter out. It's It's 7:05. We've got one more item with deputations. Two more items with deputations. I do actually need a restroom break, so if we could take a 5-minute break, if everyone's happy with that. Pardon me?
You're only a young man.
We'll come back here at 10 past. left the room, but we'll move on to the next item, which is item 5.2.3, 93 Princess Street partial demolition alterations. First representative is Mr. Jeff Lang.
Thank you, Council, for hearing me. My name's Jeff Lang. I'm the owner and occupier of 95 Princess Street. I feel compelled to be here. I feel uncomfortable being here, but I feel compelled to be here, given I feel like this is a development that's going to impact on us considerably, and I want to just highlight those issues to Council. So the development's at our neighbour's house, which is at 93 Princess Street. The proposal is a long, narrow extension. It's 4.3 metres long, 11.5 metres in length, 4.3 metres wide and 11.5 metres long. So right next to our eastern boundary. It's extremely close to our fence line. It's two stories high. It's going to cause privacy issues, overshadowing issues, loss of solar access and amenity concerns. Look, I'd highlight that in the plans they are misleading. They failed to show a house on the site plans. Now, I guess they did that because they didn't want to show how close the extension was to our house. In terms of use, I highlight the extension is actually an additional dwelling. The planning scheme has a definition of what a separate dwelling is, and this development meets that definition. The existing family will continue to reside into the existing house. An additional family will live separately in the new dwelling. In support of that, I'd say that the existing house has a kitchen. This kitchen has been there for literally over 100 years. There is no, and in the proposal, this kitchen is now turned a kitchenette. There's no physical changes to the kitchenette, so I really don't understand how this kitchen that's been there for 100 years can suddenly become a kitchenette. It's clear to me that the original owners are going to use that kitchen, and the new family are going to separately use the existing kitchen will be used by the existing family, and the new family is going to use the new kitchenette. Also supporting that, the kitchenette's within 5 metres of the new kitchen. It makes no sense unless you lock the door, and then it's going to be a separate kitchen for a separate dwelling. The kitchen is not easily accessible to the dining room, but it's very close, just next door to the kitchenette. So it's clear the kitchenette is going to be used as a kitchen, and the two kitchens are going to be used by two separate families. So in the report from the officers, the applicant was quoted as saying that the kitchenette will be reduced in size and become a thoroughfare. But you have a look at the plans, have a look at the existing layout plan, have a look at the proposed plan. There's no changes to the kitchen. The only change is that they've added the letters ETTE at the end of the word kitchen, and it magically becomes a kitchenette. There's no removal of the stove, the microwave, fridge, the appliances, oven, benches. It's just a kitchenette in name only. So look, there'll be two kitchens. There'll be two separate dwellings. The dwelling will have everything else it needs as per the definition of a dwelling in the planning scheme. The applicants have previously submitted plans for a new dwelling in the backyard, and I guess when that failed to proceed, they've tried to achieve the same thing by doing an extension. And I get why you'd want to have an extension rather than a new dwelling, because you're going to have lots of pesky requirements in a new dwelling, like separation of services, fire ratings, and provide on-site car parking. So in terms of parking, I understand that there were a number of representations from landowners in the street. The Princess Street's just down the road from the school. There's significant problems, I guess, problems with during parking and during pick-up and drop-off at the school. So by calling it an extension rather than a dwelling, they don't need to comply, don't need to require any car parking on site. In terms of amenity, the dwelling will only be 1.51 metres away from our eastern boundary, 2 stories high, and like I said before, 11.5 metres long. The existing house is already 14 or 15 metres long as well, so it's over 25 metres of this very close house very close to our boundary. So we're going to lose a lot of solar access, and unfortunately the council planners have failed to address that in their report. So our amenity will be significantly compromised.
Ms. Lang, there's 30 seconds left.
Okay, thank you. So just in summary, the proposed development is not an extension, it's a new dwelling. Should be considered as such. We've lived next to Janet Thorpe for over 20 years and we've been good neighbours, so it's pretty disappointing that this has occurred without any consultation with us. So we're willing and happy to meet with the applicants and talk about how we can address their needs and ours. But in the absence of those changes, I ask the council reject this and due to those issues regarding use and amenity. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Deputy?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Lang. I'm just in relation to overlooking or any sort of issue there. I mean, I understand that this is what 1 centimetre within the envelope, building envelope. So it's very fine margins. But what kind of overlooking or overshadowing are you likely to have?
Yeah, so thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. So all of our living rooms out the back, and as well, obviously, our backyard. So this long extension means that it's going to be looking into our backyard, into our living areas. As well as losing all our, like I said before, solar access as well.
Any other questions? Councillor Loberg.
Sorry, I'll say hello, but I have to ask it this way. What sort of loss of solar are we talking about here?
Shadowing diagrams weren't provided and weren't asked for by officers. We've done our own, so we lose access to the sun in our living room as well as the backyard.
What times?
There was, I think Mrs. Lang might be best answering that, but it was, I think it was in May at 3 o'clock, something like that. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
So
Councillor Kelly, and then Councillor Harvey.
Oh, sorry, no, it's okay.
Oh, okay. Councillor Harvey.
So, there's probably a question for the director rather than for you, Mr. Lang, but just there were no shadow diagrams provided and no engagement on what the impact of the solar, of the overshadowing might be on your backyard?
Councillor Harvey, I'm not a town planner, but my understanding is that 1 centimetre that the Deputy Lord Mayor referred to resulted in them conveniently not required to be providing shadow diagrams.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Have you had any discussions with the applicants?
No, I tried having a discussion before. I'm keen to have that discussion with them, but no, I haven't.
Any other
Very
questions?
keen to have that though and try and sort this out.
Questions? No. Councillor Dutta.
It's fine. I'll ask later.
Yep, okay. Thank you, Mr. Lang.
Thank you, Chairman.
You take your seat and we'll move to Deanne Lang. Thank you, Mrs. Lang. You'll have 5 minutes and then we'll give you a warning at 30 seconds and we'll have some questions for you.
Thank you. I'm Deanne Lang. I'm also an owner and occupier of 95 Princess Street. And as Jeff has already stated, we are reluctant to address council. However, we feel compelled to do so as the proposed development will result in a detrimental loss of our residential amenity in terms of visual impact, privacy, loss of solar access to our open plan, living, dining, kitchen area, which I think you've all received a photo of, and the overshadowing of our rear private open space. So David's just handing out a couple of photos which show our kitchen, living, dining area at the back of our house. It faces south. One of the photos also shows where this new addition is going to be, the addition being that second dwelling. By way of background, our property at 95 Princess Street and the subject site share a 37-metre long boundary. The existing house at 93 Princess Street has a 14-metre long elevation, which is set back 1.39 metres from the shared boundary. It's now proposed to also construct an extension to be used as a multiple dwelling, which is 11.435 double-storey rear extension in Weatherboard. In doing so, there will now be a 25-metre long double-storey building built within 1.5 metres of our shared boundary. We consider the design of the extension is totally inconsiderate in the extreme and has been purposefully and cunningly built, at least on paper, to meet the building envelope under Part D 11.4.2A3. We are extremely concerned that the double-storey extension, as well as being set back only 1.51 metres from our boundary, will be also directly opposite our windows within our open plan living area. We acknowledge that by undertaking minimal excavation and setting the extension back by 1.51 rather than 1.5, the proposal is within the building envelope. Therefore, this 1 centimetre means that the planning officer cannot undertake a robust assessment of the proposal under this provision of the scheme. If the extension was set back 1.5, the outcome and recommendation may be totally different. It may be recommended for refusal on the basis of the loss of residential amenity and the reduction of solar access to our open plan living rooms, overshadowing of our private open space and visual amenity. Instead, we may be left with the likelihood of a double-storey extension to be constructed 1.5 metres from our side boundary and directly in front of our habitable room windows and private open space. We are extremely concerned that the double-storey extension will result in an unreasonable and dramatic reduction of solar access to this living space. The area faces south, and as such, an extension such as this will cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to this room. Our rear yard also faces and slopes away to the south. The extension will also overshadow our rear private open space and loom over and dominate this space, causing unreasonable loss to our amenity and privacy. As previously stated, sun shadow and solar access diagrams have not been submitted. Council's planning officer has stated that the proposal meets the building envelope and therefore sun shadow and solar access diagrams are not required. This is an internal policy. Part B 8.1.3 C7 of the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme states that the planning authority, where applicable, may require shadow diagrams of the proposed building and adjacent structures demonstrating the extent of shading of adjacent private open spaces and external windows of building on adjacent sites. With the development being designed to meet the building envelope by 1 centimetre, I believe the planning officer was well within their rights to request this information. The shadow diagrams would make it obvious that the proposal would have an impact on the reduction of the solar access to our habitable rooms and overshadowing of our private open space.
30 seconds left.
While we understand the extension is currently designed to be within the building envelope, we find it very difficult to believe the extension will be built and set back 1.51 metres or the proposed depth of excavation undertaken. If both are not achieved, then the development is outside the building envelope. The decrease in setback may be found through construction, and even if a minor amendment is submitted, it may be refused or appealed and refused with the tribunal. The extension is constructed of colour-bond imitation weatherboards and aluminium windows.
That's time, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All good. Were there any questions? Deputy.
Thank you for your deputation. Just in relation to that impact, so I visited your place yesterday and saw, well, I feel that I understand your concerns, but just for the committee, and you've got this diagram that you've provided us, but what kind of impact will that have on what is presumably your main family living area?
Yes, it's our main family living area. So from a visual perspective, it's extremely close, it's high. It'll obviously reduce the solar access to this room. It generally faces south, so that's where the sunlight would come in generally.
And that's where the sun rises, like the sun moves from that side?
It is, yeah, that's correct.
Across that.
Yeah. So basically that's where we live. They've also got a couple of windows that look directly into that room, so our privacy will be compromised there. They have shown that there's battens going to be on those windows. I think they are more suited to perhaps a deck, and those windows should be opaque. They would still be able to look in on us. I understand that they've been designed so that it meets the acceptable solution. That does talk about using screens. I'm concerned they don't say what they're going to be constructed out of. If they're timber, I doubt they'll be maintained. The house isn't well maintained as it is. So for me, I would prefer opaque, glazing.
That's what you have on your...
We have it. We have it on
the other
ours.
aspect.
Yep, that's right.
Yep.
So, yes.
Thank you. So it's that overshadowing, even though it's fallen within 1 centimetre.
1 centimetre.
Because, I mean, essentially it would make an L-shaped house running down the length of your backyard, or not the full way, but certainly taking away a lot of that amenity that you'd have in your backyard, as well as your...
That's right.
Yes. Your rumpus room or main area. Thank you.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you, Mrs. Lang, just wondering about the time of the overshadowing, like how long, I assume we're talking about sort of the height of winter, but how long does that overshadowing last?
Well, like Jeff said, without the solar axis and the shadow diagrams, it's very difficult for me to say actually, how long that would be. In the previous application, which was withdrawn for a separate house in that backyard, even that double-storey house also shaded our yard. So if you can imagine a house that was nearly on the rear boundary, overshadowing our actual yard, what is a double-storey building within 1.51 metres, 11 metres in length, you can just imagine what that's going to do to those...
Morning shading, I
yeah.
imagine. One more question through you, Chair. How high is your building? Is that a 2-storey building on your side?
That's a 2-storey building, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
So currently, this is a 4-bedroom house?
It's a 4-bedroom house at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that'll be extended to a 6-bedroom house. What's the issue with parking in the street?
It is terribly problematic. So basically, sight distance isn't good anyway. The people that live next door, number 93, do not use their driveway at all. It is in a state of disrepair. It's grass. It's never been used. So another family coming in would mean another 2 cars. So yes, Princes Street is a very busy street. It's a street that links 2 other busy roads, being King Street and Regent Street. So there's a lot of people using that as a quick thoroughfare as well. But a number of residents don't use off-street parking. They're parking on street, and so having another family come in as well, it does put pressure on.
And how do you use your backyard? Like, will this overshadow your clothesline and your veggie patch and your recreational areas?
It's the recreational area, so we've got outdoor lounge, fire pits. We've got downstairs, which is a rumpus room, so we use it a lot.
Okay, yep, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thanks a lot. Take your seat. We'll move on to the next deputation, which is Libby Wilmshurst.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Libby Wilmshurst. I'm the owner, occupier of 10 Randall Street, Sandy Bay, which is situated directly behind 93 Princess Street. And I strongly object to this proposed development on 93 Princess Street based on the following concerns. This proposed 2-storey extension will in fact be a new separate house for the daughter of the owners and her husband and 3 children to live in, with the parents living in the main existing house. If approved, such a development would allow the creeping incrementalism by stealth, as it's two separate dwellings hidden by a disguise of just a house extension. Residents have not been consulted at all regarding this new proposal. I was of the understanding that new dwellings needed to be advertised as such, and two separate dwellings on one site requires 5 on-street car parking spaces. At present, the residents of 93 Princess Street don't use the driveway at all and opt to park on the street. I don't see this changing. The residents of 93 Princess Street have actually left notes under cars telling people not to park in front of their house. Will yellow line markings outside 93 and 91 Princess Street be required due to the increase in sight dangers entering Princess Street due to the increased traffic flow? The lack of parking will only contribute to the current traffic congestion on Princess Street and Randall Street, as the nearby Princess Street Primary School creates a nightmare for parking and traffic flow. There will be an unreasonable and detrimental loss of amenity, not just to my property due to overlooking, but to 95 and 91 Princess Street in terms of the bulk visual impact. Sun shadow diagrams were not submitted with this application. The proposed development has a large rear window facing into my property, which will look into my private living areas, which has not been shown on any of the submitted plans. If for some reason this proposal does go ahead, the windows facing into 95 Princess Street and into my property need to be opaque for privacy. Also, I am not sure why the rear boundary fence needs replacing, as it has grown into a beautiful thick ivy hedge that helps provide some privacy into my living area, as well as into 93 Princess Street's backyard. Should a new fence at the back boundary be built, my side is the lowest, and therefore any fence needs to be a maximum of 2.1 metres in height, as per Part B, Table 5.6.2 of the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 2015. The extension is being built too close to a sewer line as well and stormwater pipe, and if hit during construction will impact all properties. I believe the proposed development is at odds with the requirements of the planning scheme and therefore wish for this development to be rejected by this committee. If approved though, it will again allow inappropriate buildings to be built bit by bit in a beautiful heritage area, not to mention other heritage areas, ultimately destroying these heritage areas beyond recognition. People choose to live in areas like this because of the heritage aspects and the quaintness of the area, and I believe we all need to preserve areas like this for future generations. Why should residents resort to selling up to escape such intrusion? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Deputy.
Thanks for your deputation. Just in relation to the actual distance from the development to your place, can you tell me how far that would be?
Well, it's 11 minutes. I can't give you those specific answers. Sorry, Deputy. No.
Yeah.
It is set back, but I will be looking up to that development.
The slope slopes down to your place?
It slopes down, but at the moment, the previous application that they submitted last January, they were proposing a double-storey dwelling on the boundary, but they withdrew it. However, at the time, they cut some of the hedge down, so I could see straight up onto their back veranda deck area. So with this new development, I'd be definitely be seeing that extension.
And the easement, so there's a sewerage easement, so would that be compromised with this application?
I hope not, but I mean, if it is compromised, sewage would be flowing onto my property.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thanks a lot. Take your seat. We'll move on to the applicant, Alice Thorpe.
Comes any further.
Yeah,
I'll just lean over. Hello.
Yeah, that's fine. You'll have 5 minutes, and we'll give you a warning at 30 seconds, and
Great.
we'll have some questions.
All right, thank you so much. As you said, my name is Alice Thorpe. I am one of the owners of 93 Printer Street and the applicant of this application. So essentially the proposal is for partial demolition, alterations and extension of the property. It's a minor demolition at the rear and west end of the property to accommodate the extension, which includes 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, plus renovation and extension of an existing bathroom and laundry. So this property is my family home. It's where I grew up, and it has been owned by our family for over 30 years. My mother, Janet, currently resides there, and my family consists of myself, my husband and our 3 children. We share a close relationship with my mother. She's been present for all of our major milestones and my children's major milestones. The property is large and consists of ample space. We all cohabited there for a number of years, so my family and her, and we sought to find a solution to make this more sustainable and long-term. Sorry. Multi-generational living is not uncommon in a lot of parts of the world. It's becoming increasingly more common in Australia in recent years. It's important for us as a family to maintain our closeness. She is my only parent, and my children are her only grandchildren. The house is, in itself, as you have heard, in need of a significant amount of maintenance and repair, especially internally and with the external roof. My mother has not necessarily been in a position to be able to undertake these herself and keep up with the upkeep of the property. She's told me she's worried that the house is falling down. So this was another factor in us pursuing a solution for us to maintain the property that we have owned for over 30 years. The extension is hugely beneficial for both of us. Therefore, it means that we can continue to enjoy the use of the property and the use of our family home for many years to come. I'm aware of a number of representations and concerns that were raised as part of our initial application for a second dwelling, and that was back in 2021. There were a number of issues with those plans, and I got to a point with those plans where the solution was no longer viable for us. There were too many contentious things, and a lot of those came up after the representation period, and especially in relation to stormwater. One of our proposed solutions was to use an easement over the neighbour in the back, over the back of the fence, and dig up her driveway, which was not something that I was never going to agree to that. So we essentially abandoned the plans. So currently our plans are consistent with the house remaining as a single dwelling. We've met all the requirements for this. There's access to the extension from the current structure. There's a shared laundry, shared external dining and internal dining, and I agree to adhere to the provisions in the recommendation that this be classified as a Class 1A building only. It's not my intention to change this. In relation to the setback condition, our proposal is within the planning rules. We are working with a very small amount of space where the extension is. It's significantly smaller than some of the extensions that have been built recently in the neighbourhood at, say, 97 and 99 Princess Street, which are huge. It was a priority for me to put forward plans that had a minimal impact. We didn't want to go outside the building envelope. So I agree to adhere to the setback condition that's in the recommendation. So there are a number of other provisions in that recommendation that relate to privacy and stormwater and the heritage aspects, and I have no problem with agreeing to all of those.
30 seconds left.
I'm happy to leave it there and happy to take questions. Unfortunately, my draftsman is not available, so I may not be able to answer some of the technical questions, but I will definitely do my best.
Start with Councillor Lohberger and then Councillor Dutta.
Presentation. I've just got a couple of questions really. The neighbours on the upside, on the western side, have just asked whether we could look at opaque windows just on that side, so on the bit that looks into their yard. Would you be amenable to that?
I'm amenable to anything. I don't want to look at our neighbours.
Okay. And also the neighbour in Randall Street has similar issues. Would you be amenable to a vegetation screen on your rear boundary?
Yes. The fence does need replacing, the fence on the rear boundary, and also with number 95 is barely standing and is only being held up by ivy. It needs a significant replacement.
I imagine that's, if the fence is rotted under the ivy, is that?
Yes.
Okay. Look, they're my only questions, Chair. Thank you.
We've got Councillor Dudder and then Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Chair. Just one or two questions. The first one is with regards to the application that was withdrawn in January 2022. Why is it that it was withdrawn and now you have come with this extension or addition?
So the purpose of doing anything at that property was so that we could maintain a living arrangement that worked for us. Being very naive, I thought, let's try for a second dwelling because it is a large block. I didn't know at the time how difficult that was going to be. It isn't necessary that we be in a second dwelling. So as soon as we ran into issues with, there was a lot of pushback from the neighbours, which is understandable, and we had tried to consult with them before the plans were put in, but then also the stormwater, and as I said, one of the solutions being to dig up a driveway, it just wasn't worth it.
And the second question, there is some mention of not being consulted. Would you be happy to consult and discuss this further to find a better solution for both the parties?
I mean, I'm always open to having conversations, but I suppose with the first application, when we had tried to do consultation with the neighbours early, it was either not taken up or I did receive a phone call from one neighbour who was very aggressive on the phone, and when I suggested having a meeting, that was not taken up at all. We met with one neighbour who was very open to having a conversation and talking through some issues, but beyond that, there really wasn't any, there wasn't back and forth. We had tried. So then with this application, I suppose, on the back of how that experience went and me thinking that, well, as long as we do it within the planning rules and therefore it's going to be less impactful, that's a better solution for everyone. I mean, as it is, we've already had extensive conversations with our builder and our draftsman about what we could do to meet our needs and be low impact. I'm not really sure if there are any other issues. For instance, if we were to do a one-storey extension, then it would result in stormwater issues that we wouldn't be able to resolve. As it is, the stormwater is gravity fed to the street. And I think that, that all of that is also in the recommendation.
Councillor Purcell.
Just on the parking thing, how many cars do you own?
Yeah, so it's interesting that that's come up because multiple houses on the street own 2 or 3 cars. When we were living there, we had 2 between ourselves and my mum, so we actually had less cars as, 2 families in one house than some of the surrounding houses. So in answer to your question, I have 2 cars now. Part of doing this project would be to upgrade, a significant upgrade to the driveway and also the fencing. At the moment it's very hard to access the driveway and it is quite difficult to use, so it is definitely a priority for us to fix that so that we can use it.
And through you, Chair, how many car spaces will that be when you upgrade the driveway?
Well, there'll be the 2 on-street parking, and then off-street we'd have under the deck, we could turn that into a car spot and then also park in the driveway.
Planned work sounds like you'll have 1 spot on the driveway, so that's what you're intending. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey?
So, would you be open to a mediation session and a deferral of this, for that mediation session to occur?
I'd prefer not to, because as I said, I don't know what other solutions we could come up with that would meet our needs, and not be beyond the planning rules, especially with the stormwater. That was a big issue for us with the first application, and so when we met with our builder and draftsman for this application, I made it very clear I want this to be low impact within the planning rules. We need to have the space for our 3 children, so I'm not really sure how we could design something that was within our needs that wouldn't trigger some issues, and I can't foresee what those would be at this point, so I prefer not to agree to that.
Okay, so that's no to mediation. Yep.
Are there any other questions? Deputy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just in relation to your parking solution, so can you just describe it? Did you say it would be under the deck?
Yes, so with our first application, and we had to satisfy those number of off-street parking spaces, we identified that under the current deck would actually be big enough to satisfy a parking spot, and the extension that's proposed in this application wouldn't impact on that space, so I'm hopeful that we could still use that as a parking spot, and with an upgraded driveway that we could also use that as well.
But that's not part of this application?
No.
And I mean, do you acknowledge that there would be significant impact on your neighbours at number 95?
I recognise the impact. I also recognise that their neighbours on the other side have a very large extension that has been under construction for a number of years, and that would also be impacting on them, which would make the living situation there very stressful at times. As I said, I have tried to do this extension with as little impact as possible. We dropped down the level of the extension. It's not the same height as the current structure. We dropped it right down so that it wouldn't be as high, and we're digging into the ground in order to have that extension be lower and have less impact.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thanks so much for your time. Get you to take your seat. We'll open up the item. I've got Councillor Lohberger with his hand up.
Question for the Director through you. Are we able to condition this approval? If we were to approve this, can we condition it to add opaque windows to the western side and to add a vegetation barrier to the southern boundary?
I mean, I didn't quite hear technically not, but if the applicant was, and I didn't hear her response, that she was agreeable to that, then by all means we could include those as conditions.
I'd like to move that in that case, Chair.
So move the recommendation with those conditions?
Yeah, the recommendation include those conditions for opaque windows on the western side of the new extension and a vegetation screen on the southern boundary.
Thank you, Councillor Lohberger. Deputy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Mr. Noy, can you just describe how a room which is a kitchen, which doesn't have any sort of change, suddenly becomes a kitchenette? Well, is there any sort of specific definition of a kitchenette?
Not that I'm aware of.
And can a house, because this is one house, have 2 kitchens, or how does that work?
They can technically have 2 kitchens, but and this is the view of the senior statutory planner that. And on plan, they could be separated fairly easily. They are not proposed to be separated; they're conjoined, and under those circumstances, this represents a single dwelling. But I appreciate there may be alternative views expressed.
Thank you. As I said, I did visit the next door neighbours and could see the significant impact of this application virtually along their boundary fence, and certainly having a huge impact on their residential amenity. There's no doubt in my mind that would be the situation. There is a concern for me that 1 centimetre difference can make the difference between what we see in shadow diagrams and shadow impact, and how this would really just play with that the impact on the neighbours. So I really have a lot of difficulty supporting this application, and unfortunately we've only got one discretion, and that's heritage. So there was nothing else that invoked any sort of discretion through you, Chair?
No, certainly the council officers are of the view that there is only the one discretion. Now, clearly, you've heard the representors indicate that it's their view that this represents a second dwelling. We don't share that view, but so at this stage we would argue that there's only the one discretion.
And there's that condition that it cannot be used as two separate dwellings.
That's correct. It's a single dwelling.
Look, I'll foreshadow a motion for refusal based on heritage grounds in relation to partial demolition. The proposal does not meet the performance criterion with respect to clause E13 8.8.2 1 and 3 because it will cause detriment to and detracts from the historic cultural heritage significance of Heritage Precinct SB2, Upper Sandy Bay Road, Heritage Precinct. Yeah, I'm just really disappointed that this application can basically go down one side of a block and have significant impact on neighbours.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you. I have a question to the director. With regards to the issue of two dwellings, what constitutes two dwellings? Is there a definition that we have?
Yeah, there is certain requirements around having certain facilities, kitchen, bathrooms, and the like. You don't have to have a laundry, separate laundry necessarily, and they have to be, separated in some fire rated separated to constitute, a separate dwelling. So, in this instance, this is a conjoined facility. There is doors and stairs connecting both areas, and that was the view of the senior statutory planner, that therefore constitutes a single dwelling.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Look, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's an unfortunate set of circumstances we're faced here tonight, and I guess that's what part of our job is to deal with. The planning scheme, I guess, can't be all things to all people, and whether it's 1 centimetre in or 100 or 1,000, it's very hard to draw the line in the sand there. Totally sympathise with the neighbours. I think the bulk size form loss of a lot of amenity is significant, and I would, in this instance, on the back of Councillor Burnett, follow her suggestion. It doesn't comply on the grounds of heritage. It's unfortunate that, once again, it's part of the planning scheme. The shadow diagrams aren't or haven't been requested in this instance, and I think that's a major bearing on my decision as well. So, unfortunately, in this instance, could not support this application. Thank you.
I see Councillor Basolda. I might just jump in. So just for the lack of what a centimetre or two, this may have triggered a lot of different discretions and different considerations and shadowing and privacy and a lot of those. But because it was under that, it's effectively deemed to comply. Is that's correct?
That's correct. The rules, the line's got to be drawn somewhere, and the proponent has designed it in accordance with those rules. So there's hence no discretion around overshadowing in this instance.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question that Councillor Dutta raised about what constitutes one property versus one house versus two houses, but you've answered that already. Yeah. I think, and I think as has been said, this I appreciate the concerns that were raised. I do, and you know I imagine that the shadowing is a relevant factor for the neighbours, but when there's a building envelope and the applicants build right up to the boundaries of that envelope, they are still within the boundaries of the envelope. It's and that's the nature of how our planning scheme works. I'm not comfortable in taking the view that this doesn't meet the heritage provisions. I think the officer advice on this is pretty clear, and I appreciate that there's people that aren't comfortable with the proposal itself, but I don't think that the reasons why we're uncomfortable with it are reasons that we can reject this proposal for, is ultimately what I said. And I appreciate that I've got a similar sort of level of discomfort in saying that, but I do think ultimately when we're looking at the planning rules in front of us, I think this does, even if unfortunately complied, I think it does still comply. So I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation with that added condition, but I'll leave my remarks there. I did see Councillor Basalt with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So firstly, I'd like to actually commend the applicant. I know that in Australian culture, multi-generational living is not really the norm, but as we move toward a world where housing is unaffordable for the next generation coming through, these sorts of solutions, if you have a great relationship with your parents and you want to try to make it work, is actually a solution to the housing crisis in the longer term, and it may be a solution to housing affordability for young people. And I think it's a beautiful thing if three generations can help each other get along. I think that's wonderful. So I do commend the applicant. I think that as the chair has mentioned, it doesn't matter that it's 1 centimetre inside the building envelope. It's in the building envelope. It's as simple as that. So it doesn't trigger anything. That's how the planning scheme views it. And as the planning authority, that's the view that we should take. Yes, I can see that there are some concerns around overlooking and overshadowing, but admittedly the applicant has done pretty well everything they can in the design to drop it down as low as possible within the constraints of the block. So I don't really see how the applicant can do much more than they have. I also think that there just needs to be a comment on the record that if one house is allowed to do a modern new extension out the back, why should that preclude the neighbours from being able to do the same 5 years later? I think it's a relevant argument, not necessarily to planning, but most of the houses in this strip have a modern extension out the back, and the one that is being proposed for a modern extension out the back is causing consternation about having a modern extension that everyone else has. And so in terms of equity, I don't think that that's a particularly equitable argument to prosecute. So look, I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation as is. Just on the heritage grounds, I don't agree that this has any impact on heritage because of the built form and because of how it drops down, and doesn't really impact on the street heritage values in any way, shape or form. So I don't agree at all with that assessment. So I will be supporting it, and unfortunately, Councillor Lohberger, I can't support your amendment.
It's not Councillor, you moved the motion, didn't you? Yeah, it's not an amendment, it's the motion with the added condition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other, Councillor Sherlock?
I would just be very brief because I think everybody's pretty much discussed what I wanted to say. It is again difficult, and I understand the concerns of the neighbours. But yes, it is within the building envelope, and this is the unfortunate thing sometimes. Sometimes we do have the capacity to exercise our discretion, and I'm not entirely convinced that the discretion upon which, or the discretion that we can actually exercise within this circumstance is something that I'm comfortable supporting. Yes. It's difficult, but I do understand all the issues that have been contained and all the issues that the councillors and aldermen have said. But yeah, I think I will also go along with the recommendations from our officers. It would be good if we were to go ahead with the recommendation. I think Councillor Lohberger's already said, just with the conditions, the opaque windows and the vegetation screen that the applicant has already agreed to do anyway. So, yeah, thank you.
Can I make a point of clarification? So the pattern of development in those backyards are extensions, but this is probably twice as long as other extensions, just as a point.
Thank you for that. Any other comment? Councillor Dada.
Thank you, Chair. I am also in a very difficult situation like the others. And I understand the arguments and the facts presented. Unfortunately, I am here tied to the rules that I have to go along with. And because I'm tied to the rules of planning rules, I have great difficulty finding anything else. And therefore, I'm now looking at the motion, the fortiori motion moved by the deputy with regards to heritage grounds. Again, I'm just having difficulty with that. You know, I would usually support anything to do with the heritage, but reading the statements made by staff, I have difficulty. But then listening to her further that there are extension, but this is a different extension, and maybe on that ground, if it's a fact, I would then bow to take a different turn and think differently. Thank you.
Alderman Bloomfield.
When I listened to all the sides, I was really quite stunned to hear just what a profound impact was going to be upon the neighbours, and in fact that we are left with just one small option to exercise, which we can't. And I wonder how any of us would feel if we were that neighbour ourselves, how happy we might be with this. But as you say, there is no room for us to make an alternative decision. We have to go with planning laws, so I believe it will have to go as it is.
Any other comment? No? Okay, with that said, then I'll move the item moved by Councillor Lohberger, which was the officer's recommendation with the added condition of the opaque windows on the western side and the
western side of the new extension.
Yep, and the vegetation screening. Yep. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. No. Show of hands. All those in favour.
Reluctantly.
Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Purcell, Councillor Lohberger, Alderman Bloomfield, and Alderman Baracus.
And against.
Councillor Kelly, Councillor Ducker, Councillor Harvey,
That's carried. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to the last item with deputations. We're getting through them. Item 5.1.1, 27-1 Collins Street visitor accommodation. We'll give a minute for the room to filter out a bit. Okay. I'll ask Richard Fowler to come up to the table and.
I realise this is twisted.
That's why I walked into one. Sure.
Cheryl, no?
Oh, thanks. Bring the microphone as close as it'll allow you to, and speak into it as much as you can for the audio. You'll have 5 minutes to present, and we'll give you a warning at 30 seconds, and then we'll have some questions for you.
We don't intend to go through our objections again. It was said that, and I'm just pleased you read the application for objections. So we simply want to respectfully reiterate the following. One, the town of One Collins is not a hotel, not designed to be. There's no reception, no concierge, etc. Two, the increasing number of short-term visitors is changing the character of the complex to a hotel. Example, short-term residents come and go at all hours. Why then are we changing the character of the One Collins Street? Three, One Collins Street is a residential building, and people have bought there for security, safety, the feeling of belonging to a small community, the owner, occupancy, the lifestyle. Four, we already have described some of the complaints forwarded to the council. I hope you've got those. In our objection, we relate these to short-term residences. We can read them out again if you want to. 5, if you approve this application, it will contradict the council's planning directive 6, visitor accommodation into item 3, 3.1 and 3.2. I can go through those again if you want to. There is already 5 short-term accommodation used in the tower. I believe that there are more not sanctioned by the council. 6, whilst the committee has applied conditions for short-term accommodation in the form of management plan, they are not being adhered to. Example, no eye contact with potential short-term residents, hence complaints arise. We know this because one short-term rental has the key across Collins Street, locked on a door, a roller door. 7, short-term residents do not adhere to complex bylaws as per the complaints listed in their objection and forward to council. 8, I'm not sure why the committee is entertaining these applications when there's housing crisis in Tasmania. It has been proven by the federal, state and local departments that short-term accommodation drives up the price of long-term rentals. I thought council had recognised publicly last year and in these discussions a while ago that they declared no short-term rental would be approved for this very reason. Number 9, Unit 27 was rented to the health department for several years and to professional residents, example doctors, on a 6-monthly basis. There has been no complaints, to my knowledge, for this very reason. If you approve this application, we fear our home and our surrounding homes are on the same floor will be subject to the similar complaints as noted in an objection. We asked the Planning Committee to seriously consider our objection and that of several others to refuse this application. I think my wife wants to say something as well.
We left a large residential home to downsize, and we weren't really prepared to come into the city, but when we found out that it was a residential building, we decided that that would be okay. I have a garden and we love it in town. Richard and I both have health issues, so we were pleased to be near services in town. Richard's actually going through chemo again at the moment. I've been a type 1 diabetic for 45 years, and we really enjoy being able to use the accommodation as a home, and we relate to and get on with our neighbours really well in that complex. But I would not have moved into town to have lived in a hotel. It's sort of losing its character. Thank you.
Okay, we'll open up to questions. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you both for your deputation and representations. Is there situations with other visitor accommodation within your complex that might happen, you know, that they might be used as visitor accommodation at the same time?
Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
There are other visitor accommodation within your complex?
I think 5 at the moment.
Yeah. So are they often let at the same time as visitor accommodation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you know, the complaints we've raised.
Yep. And so this is like 10% of this will bring it up to over 10%. Of that. So, and you've made your points quite clear as to how important it was to live in that area. So just to make it quite clear for me, so you would not have bought in that place if you'd known that it was a short term.
No way.
Yeah.
It's like our home. We have a garden there. Our children visit us there. Our grandchildren come there. But with people coming and going around us, it feels like a hotel.
Yep.
By the way, we live in number 26. Next one.
And with the other visitor accommodations, and they have a visitor management plan, is there one single point for you to ring if you have concerns in relation to that?
Oh, really? No. For example, I'm listed in the complaints, and I won't mention them, but 5 guys went up there, threw down a 20-foot hose on the ground floor. They were drunk. The next door neighbours heard them swearing, blaspheming, and down on the bottom it was a family, a little girl. So yeah.
Okay. Yes, and I did note in the papers that was used by Royal Hobart Hospital staff previously, which is quite ironic. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thanks a lot for your time. Get you to take your seat, and we'll move on to the final deputation of the night. It's Greg Herford. Thank you, Mr. Herford. You'll have 5 minutes, and we'll give you a warning at 30 seconds, and then we'll have some questions for you.
No worries. Thank you. Hopefully it won't take that long. My name's Greg Herford. I'm one of the owners of the property at apartment 27 at 1 Collins Street. Obviously, I'm here to support the application that we put forward to enable the use of the property for short-term accommodation as well as existing long-term. We've owned the property for over 5 years, and it is an investment property for us, so we are not residents of the property at this stage. Have read the planning report that was prepared by council, and basically it makes good sense to me. We're not setting any precedent. We're basically submitting an application that has been similar applications been made in the past, reviewed and approved by council. So there's nothing new about what we're putting forward in our particular case. Understand from the planning report that there'll be the need for a visitor management plan, and we're certainly more than happy to put one of those together. Last but not least, the period of regulation for short-term accommodation, this property actually was a short-term property for roughly 6 weeks, and that was between the time that we purchased the property and submitted it for long-term accommodation. So it's been leased on a commercial basis for 5 years, but prior to that there was a brief period where it actually was short-term accommodation. There were no incidents reported. We are on the ground floor, so I understand that there's been some unfortunate situations with other accommodation. However, this one's on the ground floor, so things raised about objects coming over balconies and so forth will not be a case in this instance. Fundamentally, that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? I see the deputy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Herford. I just have a couple of questions. So, is this apartment, is that next door to any other apartments?
Yes, it is. It's next door to number 26.
Right, okay. Are there other apartments in that vicinity on that floor?
There are. There's roughly another 5, I guess. So it's part of the round tower within 1 Collins Street, so rather than the other section of the building. So it's it's on the ground floor of the round tower. So there will be another, altogether probably 5 or 6 in the general vicinity. Yep.
Yep. And I'm just curious, do you feel that you could guarantee the behaviour of any people who might have short-term rental there?
Yeah. No one can ever provide a rock-solid 100% guarantee on that, and I think I'd be stupid to make such a guarantee to you. That said, we are very particular about who we'll make available to the property. There are various options you can make with short-term accommodation. We certainly vet anyone who would attend very carefully because it is our property as well. The only experience I have with this is in the 6-week period that we had it on short-term. There were 2 people who attended the property at the time. One was a lady and her mother who were visiting from England, and they were there for roughly 2 weeks. Another gentleman who was in a triathlon, and his most prized possession was a $20,000 bicycle, and he needed somewhere to retain that. We made very sure that they were bona fide visitors and that they would maintain the property as well as they could. That said, yes, if someone really wanted to take advantage of a short-term accommodation, it could happen.
And one final question. Just in relation to that management, whoever's going to management and be that point of contact as per the conditions, are you that person, or is it somebody as a strata management?
No, it'll be ourselves, myself and my wife. Yep.
Right. So that would mean that there might be 6 or 7 different management people to get in contact with. Is there any way through the body corporate?
Sorry. In terms of contact points, we'd only be the contact point for our own property, for just the one property.
Yeah. It creates a bit of dilemma, but I'll ask the director about that. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, sorry. Apologies. No other questions? No. Thank you for your time. If you want to take your seat, we'll open up the item to debate. Who wants to kick things off? Councillor Dudda.
I just want to ask the director a few questions, please.
Yep.
The question number 1 is that this will be number 7 if we approve it tonight in that complex. Now, at what point, when the next application came, will it be the 20th application or the 10th? When do we say this is enough now?
I think that this question was asked of me the last time this came before us. But look, the officers have done an analysis, and the criteria talks about the area. It doesn't necessarily talk about the site. And our analysis indicate that for the Wapping precinct itself, there are some 10 short-term visitor accommodation, excluding the hotel, that we're aware of in an area that includes quite a significant number of dwellings, and I think there's some reference. But in terms of the number of dwellings within the vicinity, it is quite a significant number. So it's a relatively small proportion. Having said that, I'm not discounting the issues that are raised about impacts on the residents within 1 Collins Street. I understand those concerns, and it's fair to say that it was the officer's view and it was the council's view when this provision did come into force that we perceived that these issues might arise, particularly within stratum developments, and that's why prior to this provision, there was exclusion to short-stay visitor accommodation within stratum developments set aside for private residents.
Thank you. And the other question that I have on, I think 6.77, the report states that while it is recognized that some guests may use visitor accommodation in a manner that generates unreasonable noise and so forth. My question is, what is the definition of noise, and is it measured by a decibel, or do we have that evidence, or we don't go down that path?
There are decibel readings associated with plant and equipment, but that is not the case so far as normal domestic noise associated with people's talking or behaviours or TV use and the like. So there's no decibel reading for what constitutes reasonable noise so far as that is concerned, and the environmental health officers have had some experience with evaluating what's reasonable and what's not, and that's based on intensity, based on loudness, and the extent of that occurrence. So yeah, it's a number of factors that are taken into account.
Thank you.
Councillor Basalt.
Thank you. Just through you, Chair, to the Director. Should we refuse this application, would it be subject to appeal?
Yeah. Well, if the applicant were to appeal it, yes.
Are there any precedents that we can look to, or is there any advice that you can give with regard to the likelihood of the success or otherwise of an appeal against a refusal?
Yeah, look, based on the officer's advice, we're clearly satisfied that it satisfies that the relevant provision. So we wouldn't hold out much, not hope, but of successful upholding an appeal for refusal.
Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think we've got a situation where Mr Fowler has and various other representatives have been presenting to this committee or the previous council's committee on similar applications, and again their peace of mind and their home and their security is compromised. We see this in short stay accommodation applications, ironically for something that was used for the Royal Hobart Hospital staff, which I'm not quite sure where they're finding their accommodation now, but this is an investment property, and whilst Mr Herford has a right to invest and use his investment property the way that he wants to, the impact on residential amenity is quite clear, and it is a problem. So it's not just a next door neighbour who might be applying for short stay accommodation. This is within a complex, and it's a continued nightmare for these residents in this vicinity. So I'm really tired of for them for these applications, because I think it's just not acceptable. If they lived in an aged care facility, would they be having this kind of problem? Would they be facing this kind of problem? No, they would not be facing this kind of problem because they won't be subleasing rooms or, you know, independent living units or whatever. So although it's probably like flogging a dead horse, we know the limitations of the state government's Planning Directive number 6. I will move a foreshadowed motion for refusal, or have we got a live motion yet? Okay, so I'll move a motion for refusal based on the proposal does not meet the performance criterion with respect to clause 3.3e of the Planning Directive number 6. Exemption and standards for visitor accommodation and planning schemes for the Sullivan's. It's the Sullivan's Cove planning scheme, isn't it?
It is.
Thank you, Deputy. I've got Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I'm also struggling to support this, and I've just flicked through to the delegated decisions, and there were 15 houses change of use. 15 change of use, and then there was a couple of others which were partial change of use. So 15 whole homes between the 8th of December and the 23rd of January were lost to short stay accommodation. And I know we've tried to draw the line. We've got our amendment, our planning scheme amendment, which is, we can ask another question after about that, see where that is this month. But I'm just really struggling to support this, short stay accommodation in this particular apartment block, where this comes to us fairly regularly. We hear the same argument, and I would have been really annoyed had I bought something in this apartment block and watched them slowly get converted to short stay accommodation and just change the whole, culture of the building, the whole amenity of living in this place. So I'm really sympathetic for the representatives here tonight, and I'll be supporting the motion for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Sherlock.
Just with regards to the appeal that Councillor Posselt was talking about, of course this can be appealed, but has there ever been a test case yet for a refusal that we've done for short stay accommodation and it's gone to appeal? Have we had a test case at all?
No.
Yes, I find that really interesting, and it's, again, like it's already been stated, it's like flogging a dead horse. We don't have a test case, but we don't have to deny something just because we haven't had a test case yet. Maybe this is the test case. Maybe this is the way we can go forward and go, yep, no, sorry, we're not approving these, regardless of the fact that at the moment the state government is not doing much with regard in this particular area. We do have the Planning Directive 6 from the state government, and I fully accept the arguments put forward by the Deputy with regards to 3.3e. And I too, as in the last term, am sick and tired of these planning applications and feeling as though we are strong-armed into accepting a position that we know categorically is not great for our community. I won't accept it, everybody else can accept it, and that's okay, and you can justify it in your own rules, but the converse of that can also be justified, and that's Planning Directive 6, 3.3e, as Deputy Lord Mayor has just pointed out. So I will be supporting the foreshadow motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Look, I'll speak and then I'll see Alderman Bloomfield. Look, this is normally the part where I get up and lecture and and I'll just sort of preface that because normally I'd be sort of bringing up that we have these short stay applications, council rejects them, then we end up in that situation where we can't even get a planning lawyer to represent us, and we have that sort of Groundhog Day. And I do acknowledge that sort of in Councillor Harvey's sort of acknowledged difficulty in council's role in that space. I do think this development's slightly different to those cases. I do think that, look, while I do support the officer's recommendation on this, I do think that a pretty fair and reasonable interpretation could be made either way on this, especially in regards to 6.7.4 on page 18 in regards to clause 3.3e. I don't think, whilst I do think, and in regards to the comments on the appeals, personally I think that if we refuse this and it was appealed, My view is that the applicant would likely be successful in their appeal. I don't think it's the same as many of these applications that we have where we're effectively refusing, in my view, without merit. That said, on this one, look, one of the big aspects is, and I know it was raised during, was raised by the director, because I had a similar flashback to another application on this same building, was it 2020 or 2019? And there was that conversation about, you know, which incremental addition is the straw that breaks the camel's back in regards to fundamentally changing an area, when, you know, if you have 1,000 incremental changes, eventually you cross that threshold, but which is the one that is that line. And it is also, though, mentioned that when we refer to area, it does mean the broader area, and the broader area does well, the activity area does make some clarifications. It says under clause 15.2, objective of the activity area make clear that the area is to provide for the development of an inner city residential neighbourhood and to ensure that residential development is the primary focus throughout the activity area, whilst also allowing non-residential uses to be developed in a flexible performance approach based on the amenity and characteristics of the specific site. So, in regards to the change of use, I think that this does fall within what's prescribed in that those conditions. And then the question is whether or not there's a reasonable argument to be made that this will have undue impacts on neighbours through what's provided in section 3.3. I'm sitting on the fence myself. I'm inclined to support the officer's recommendation, but I will acknowledge that I don't think this is the same as sort of the majority of short stay applications that we've had come through here. Alderman Bloomfield was next, and then there's Councillor Dudder again.
I guess we're facing a situation where what we feel would be the right decision isn't necessarily the legally right decision for this council, in that we've already been told very strongly that if we were to go against the recommendation of that we will end up losing an appeal, which will cost the council money, and there's no guarantee that this will be the case that we should be championing in court in the first place. I equally question why are we trying to champion change through planning law. We're a council, we are here to adhere planning law. If we want to change planning law, I think there's a better way than using people as chess pieces to do that, because at the end of the day, these are people who necessarily will be facing significant cost, whatever we choose to do, if we don't play right. So as far as I'm concerned, I totally understand the impact of Airbnb. When I door knocked all those houses and I saw whole sections of community had disappeared to empty door places because you knew that no one lived there anymore. That is profound, and I get that. Okay, I'm not going to say that necessarily the impact and the number of places that are being taken with this type of scenario is necessarily right, but this is not the way to play. We have to adhere to the planning law as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, and that because at the end of the day, we're not here to risk council funds for losing an appeal. We're here to uphold planning law. So I'll have to be going with the recommendation.
Councillor Dudder.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to begin by making a number of observations here. Firstly, for me, I think as far as others are concerned, a number of us have been finding ourselves in that conflict situation tonight with a number of applications before us. We've struggled with a number of them, either to go yes or to go no. And this is in a similar basket for me. However, like Councillor Alderman Bloomfield have said, as a planning authority and having that hat on, that is what I've got to use the rules to make my judgment here. Now, my decision is not going to be based on the fact that I'm sick and tired of this, because that's not a good reason for me. That's my feeling. I've got to put that aside. I'm not going to make the judgment or decision based on because there is housing shortage, and therefore because of that I'm going to now not allow this. That again would be not the right thing to do for me. And there are a number of other reasons. I can go on, but time doesn't allow me to do that. But let me make my stand and my reason for saying not supporting the staff recommendation. I asked the question, and the question was, how do we define noise? The definition is subjective. How do we measure noise? It's not quantifiable. There is some element of subjectivity in here. Now, when I read 6.77 under clause 3.3E2, it says quite clearly, while it is recognized that some guests may use visitor accommodation in a manner that generates unreasonable noise, it goes on to say, and then finishes off by saying, the proposed visitor accommodation is not considered likely to cause an overall unreasonable increase in noise. Now, this is a subjective view based on a number of rationale and arguments. Now, for me, the converse of this is what I will take, that regardless of the fact that if it is a visitor living in there or a person who is a permanent resident renting the place, the noise factor is still there. But from an anecdotal point of view and my own lived experience, if you come as a visitor, you don't care. You know, you are more loose, as it were, with noise, your bags, I've got to go and catch the plane at 6 o'clock. So you don't take that into consideration. But if you are a permanent resident or a tenant in the place, there is a greater understanding and community amenity and respect for each other. So for me, the converse is the argument that I will take, that considering that these people would come as guests, there is a consideration from my part that there will be a likely increase of noise, and therefore I will have difficulty supporting this. Thank you. Under clause 3.3E2.
Thank you, Councillor Dada. Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, personal experience, I know this building really well. I lived across the road in Creswell's Row, and my parents-in-law lived in number 1 Collins Street on, I think it was level 4 or 5, I can't remember. But I know the building well, I know the layout, I know how why you may choose to retire there, its location. You know, it's a fantastic spot, it's a fantastic building. I completely get all that. I can get the argument put by Councillor Dutta about, you know, potential behavioural things, but at the same time you can have equal weight to an opposite argument that I play my grand piano too loud and annoy all the neighbours doing that, but I live there. So, you know, whether or not there's any evidence to support the argument that there is more noise that come out of these short stay accommodation in a unit or stratum type arrangement, I guess if someone can provide me with that evidence, then I'd be willing to take a look at it. But based on the planners' recommendations, they say that it's not really unreasonable based on their assessments. I do have a major problem with Airbnb. I do have a major problem with the way it is affecting our city, how it's causing major issues in the whole structure of the housing market, driving homelessness, pushing people further out of town than they should be. We have levers as council that we can pull right now that aren't through the planning scheme. And what frustrates me is that we continue to bang our heads against a brick wall by knowingly making decisions that will be appealed and which the director has advised are unlikely to be fought because we can't find a planning lawyer to represent us. Because the legal argument is so weak. You know, I call on the state to adjust the planning scheme as we have asked them to do to address this issue. But fundamentally, we're not here as council tonight. We're here as the planning committee, and we need to have our planner hats on. And there's no legal reason, in my view, why this should be refused, and it concerns me the potential cost to the council if we continue to go down that path when we receive these applications. So I unfortunately won't be able to support the Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on something my colleague, Councillor Posselt, said. Just regarding the state government, I feel like we have a state government that criticises us if we reject housing applications, but the same government has tied our hands on the loss of housing to short stay holiday accommodation. Now, when will they unshackle us and allow us to properly assess short stay applications that are continuing to reduce Hobart's long-term housing stock? It's a really big issue. I do agree with a lot of what Councillor Posselt said. Regretfully, I'll be voting for this, and I don't want to, but I do feel the planning advice is quite clear, and I feel that we are shackled by the state government itself, and it's about time they started to show a bit of concern for what's happening to the housing market in Hobart. I'm quite emotional about this. I don't want to vote for this, but we are shackled, and I just feel that it's time the government pulled its finger out and had a look at what's happening in Hobart. So that'll do me. Thank you.
Well said.
Any other comment? No, we'll put it to a vote. The motion moved by... Oh, no, it's a motion for refusal, sorry. By the Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. No. Show of hands. All those in favour?
Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Lord Mayor.
And against? That motion's lost. Did somebody want to move the officer's recommendation? Councillor Basalt. Did we need further debate, or were we happy to just put
Just
that?
a,
Yep.
just
Deputy?
a question. Just in relation to the visitor, the van, can that be coordinated so that it's not different for each and every one, or can we write to the body corporate and ask them to consider that?
Well, you couldn't make it the same contact number because there's different owners who have different needs and management responsibilities. So you couldn't
We
do
couldn't
that.
ask them to coordinate it so that it actually allows some residential amenity for the existing residents.
You're talking about the contact for the management plans for
Yes, yeah.
for complaints.
Because there are various like there's the Strata Management Company which runs. I know Mr. Herford had that in some of the was in the documentation.
Yeah, I mean, you could put it as advice that consideration be given to coordinating a single point of contact for complaints. And
I wonder if Councillor Posselt would accept that in as part of an advice clause.
Sorry, just a bit of chit chat around. I just missed the advice clause. Can you?
Well, I think what the Deputy Lord Mayor is alluding to is a single point of contact for complaints. Now, you couldn't necessarily do that as a condition of approval because it's relating to other applications that have been previously approved. But what I've suggested is that that an advice clause be included that the applicant be consider coordinating a single point of contact for complaints for the through the body corporate.
Something to that effect.
Something to that effect.
Yeah, look, Deputy Lord Mayor, I had the same thought myself, that it would be great in this type of circumstance if we can have, we've got 7 units and there's no reason why it's not going to be 10 or 15 by the time we do something about this. So, to make it simpler for residents to make complaints, I think that's a wise move. So yeah, I'm happy to accept that.
Any other comment? Right, I'll move that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Show of hands, all those in favour? Against?
Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Harvey, and the Deputy Lord Mayor. It's carried, Chair.
That's carried. Okay, so that is the last. That's the last one we've got. Move on to item number 6, report. Okay, moved by Councillor Harvey. Any discussion on that one?
Anyone's of note?
Thank you, Chair. There is an interesting application at item 12, which is the conversion of an unused bowling green to netball courts. So that will come to committee next meeting.
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
It has been, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Lots of green space.
Underutilised recreational space.
As a flower-bed netball court, that's all
Can you
good.
play netball on grass?
Any other comment? Look, I'll just note again, I think I've already noted it before, having that column with the numbers has made it so much easier to navigate these things. Rather than sitting there trying to go, which page is this on and what do you, it's...
30 years to work that out.
Oh, that's fantastic. Did anybody, Councillor Harvey moved that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Move 6.2.
6.2 moved by the Deputy. Any discussion? Going once, going twice? No. I'll move that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried. We have questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I asked this question and maybe the Director is still in the process of getting the answer. With regards to the cost for the cable car, since it was lodged, mediation, appeal, trial, etc., how much has it cost us, and if the costs quantum application can be made or not?
My understanding is, and I thought it was going to be this meeting, but there was a slight hiccup on compiling that information, so it will be provided to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, in that Newtown, that aggregate that was piled up behind the hockey centre, what's that project for? I noticed there was about 10 trucks there today.
I'd need to take that on notice.
All right.
No debate. Any other questions? No. Okay, can we get a motion to close the open and open the closed? Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.